All right. Hello, everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. Right now, I know y'all can't see it. Y'all can't see me. But I've got, it's very dark in my apartment right now. I've got a glass of wine next to me, and I've got my stuff out, and I'm ready to get started. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to everyone who watched my premiere. You guys are awesome. I meant what I said in the premiere. I know it was super long. It was way longer than I wanted it to be, and I apologize. It was like 45 minutes. I had popped into Havoc's stream not long ago to say hello and to wish him luck, and he said that he saw my premiere and it was longer than he thought it would be too, so I recognize that it went a lot longer. And I know y'all are going to say it's all right, and I'm glad y'all are okay with it, but it shouldn't have been that long. From now on, I'm going to limit the question of the day to just 2 or 3 questions, because doing them all just takes too long. I hate to miss anybody's questions because you all have such good questions, but that's just what it's going to have to be. Got back to work today. Really crazy stuff at work, but it was also a very productive day. So, yeah. But anyway, yeah, Havoc is streaming right now, so if you would rather watch For Honor, some cool For Honor footage, go check out Havoc's stream. I'm sure he's still going, because I think he was just starting when I went in to check on him. But we today are not going to be gaming. This is my chill and read stream. This is a very, very relaxed, easygoing stream where I basically answer questions with you guys and read you some of my stories. And recently we have been reading my story New Epoch, as well as some other short stories, and I would be more than happy to read some more of New Epoch to you. But before we do New Epoch, before we go back into that, I want to read a different story to you guys tonight. Tonight, I want to start things off by reading you a very special story. I'm going to pull it up. This story is called The Thing I Wanted. Now, it sounds a little bit silly, The Thing I Wanted. But this is a story that I wrote for my mom and dad. It was their Christmas present this year. It is a long short story. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but what I mean by that is my normal short stories, let me put it in perspective. If I typed out my short stories onto Google Docs, my short stories usually run to about maybe 6 or 7 pages. This story was 17 pages. So it is a very long story, and yet it is also a short story. So, I'm going to read you guys The Thing I Wanted, which is my gift to my mom and dad. I also will warn you before I start reading that this story is written from the POV of a woman, a female character. I'm not going to bother trying to read the whole damn thing in a female voice. It would wear out my voice too quickly, so I will say her lines in a female voice, but for the rest of it, for just the writing, I'm going to do my normal voice. I hope you guys will understand. All right, let's do it. The Thing I Wanted. I heard the sound of little feet pattering up the sidewalk towards the front door. Even though I knew who it was, my hand still instinctively reached for the knife on the kitchen counter until the door opened and I could confirm who it was. The front door of our quaint little house opened suddenly as a little boy of about 6 toddled inside. He was carrying a backpack thicker than his own body that he lugged behind him. His sandy brown hair was feathery and soft as it bounced a little with each step. He wore a red t-shirt with a comic book character on it who I quite forgot the name of, but he knew everything about. His denim shorts had a stain on the right leg that I suspected was ketchup from his lunch. His tennis shoes squeaked a little on the floor, and I inclined my head to see his face. He had fair and soft skin with baby blue eyes that were downturned, and his lips were stuck in a pouting expression, and he wasn't making eye contact. That was unusual. Whenever he came home from school, Marcus always would run in with a big smile on his face. He would hug my leg and ask what was for dinner, or he'd tell me all about this funny thing he learned at school. It had become a routine for the last few months. I was used to routine, and seeing his sullen expression made me worried. "Welcome home," I called to him. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine, thanks." His voice said otherwise. He dropped his book bag and ran to his room. I stopped washing the green onion in my hands and looked at the closed room door. And though I couldn't see him, I could practically feel the melancholy emanating from his room. This was definitely not fine. But I couldn't let myself get distracted right now. Dinner first, then I'd see what was wrong with him. The key to success is proper prioritization. At least, that's the way it was in the agency. My name was Anastasia Kasiliev. At least, that was the case once. I'm 36 years old, and I've lived in America for 5 years. I was born with blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. In the course of my life, all of these aspects of my identity have changed repeatedly to the point I've lost count of the number of faces, hair, eyes, and skin that I've worn. To put it simply, until now, I've not fully known who I was. When I came to America, I'd taken a job as a secretary to a senator in Pennsylvania. I knew I hadn't gotten the job for my credentials or my degrees. I knew this by the way he drooled each time I strutted by his desk. I don't mind admitting I'm attractive. It's perhaps vain to admit it, I'll grant that, but that was half the reason the agency sent me here in the first place. The pompous senator and his whole cabinet had no idea who I really was, why I was really in America, and what I'd really been doing in his office. But that was entirely the point. No one ever knew that I was a member of the Komitet Gotrobadzonsky Bezovnosti, the KGB. I was a Soviet Union Black Widow, a special agent sent to America to spy on the capitalist Western dogs and learn all their dirty little secrets, uncover every dirty deal, every secret project, and every financial decision. I was encouraged to adopt an identity that would be acceptable and easy to blend in. I was ready for it. I knew I was. But after my first year, everything changed. In the Soviet Union, you're told about the horrid conditions of America, evil and barbaric ways of the capitalists, that the Americans were cruel, racist people who favored the wealthy, the elite, and the powerful, and that all the other poor fools were left to grovel, plead, and scrounge for food, that prisons were overflowing with those who could not make ends meet, and that the Americans were warmongering dogs who couldn't wait to fire the first warhead at our beloved motherland. I came to this country expecting to be disgusted, and expecting to have to play the part of a street whore, some kind of pitiful serf to the elitists in power. But that's simply not what I saw. If anything, I found the complete opposite. America was beautiful. The propaganda told about the West simply did not match with reality. I kept trying to tell myself that it was a lie, cleverly invented by the West to deceive itself and others. And while, yes, I could see an ugly underbelly some of the time, it wasn't nearly as extensive or horrid as what I'd seen from other countries, even my own. And by the end of my first year, I no longer desired to leave America. It was slowly and gradually becoming my home. Of course, my handlers in the motherland were worried about this possibility and checked in on me regularly. I gave information when it was available, and I sold a few meaningless tidbits of intel that they might chew on back in Moscow, but otherwise I had grown used to my quiet life here. I found that when it comes to misdirection and subterfuge, even my own agency isn't impervious. But the year now was 1993. 2 years since the KGB officially was dissolved. I wasn't a sleeper agent anymore. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't Anastasia Vasilyev. My name now, for all intents and purposes, is Julia Church, a mild-mannered secretary. That old life was behind me, especially now that I had Marcus to think about. I never told him, of course. Lord knows how he'd react to it. I've been found out by far more understanding and mature men before. Every spy has their identity discovered at least once in their career, and with all of them, the response is usually simply escape or elimination of the witness. And for Marcus, both options were simply inconceivable. No, Marcus can't know the truth. I put dinner on the table, but Marcus didn't come out of his room. I walked to the door and knocked softly to get his attention. There was no answer at first, so I tried again. Marcus, dinner is ready. There was again no answer. It's going to get cold. Still no answer. I knocked with a little more force. Marcus, are you all right? I'm okay, came a deep whimper. A lie. Marcus wasn't good at lying. I knew that well. Lying was part of my job. I could spin a lie like a spider spins thread, and likewise I could catch even the most well-hidden lie from body language, voice, tone, and eye position. When you conduct and sit in on interrogations, you learn how to read every fidget of a human body and every twitch of facial expressions. Even vocal frequencies can give away a half-truth. I was an outstanding liar, which in turn made me an ironically excellent lie detector. But I don't need any of these skills with Marcus. The child just wasn't good at hiding his emotions well. He'd never have lasted in the agency, which I'm glad for. Marcus, come on out. Finally the door opened and the little boy poked his head out, looking up at me. His blue eyes were bloodshot and puffy. His hair was messy from burying it under pillows, and I realized he'd been crying. As I caught streaks of tear trails down his cheeks, I knelt down so we were on eye level. Marcus, tell me what's wrong. I don't wanna, he sniffed, shaking his head back and forth and looking away again. How can I help make it better if you don't tell me what the problem is? I asked. Marcus winced back at the logic. I don't want you to make it better, he cried. Then do you want something to eat? I asked. I had seen other mothers snap back at their children by this point, and I could understand the temptation. Marcus could be very frustrating, but patience was also part of being an intelligence agent. You have to learn to balance out your emotions and your voice. If you give in to anger or frustration, you lose the edge. You can't let your frustration show, as this reveals a chink in your armor. So even at his most disagreeable, I worked hard to maintain a calm and logical demeanor. This is easier said than done, and I confess some days Marcus can be more infuriating than any prisoner or hostage that I've interrogated. But over time, I've learned what tricks work best on the child. Perhaps that's why Marcus was getting more upset. He was mad that I was getting emotional, or maybe he wanted me mad. He wanted me to be upset, and I wasn't giving it to him. Marcus glared a moment and then nodded. Finally, seeing my window of opportunity to get through to him, I seized it. Then let's eat. Then you can go back to whatever it was you were doing in your room. The deal seemed fair to Marcus as he finally toddled from his room to the kitchen and climbed into the chair. Sorry. He began scarfing down the food hungrily, and I occasionally had to tap the table with my knuckle, which was a sign I wanted him to slow down. When I was a little girl, My mother used similar techniques with me. Nonverbal cues to inform you that your behavior needed correction. I never expected them to come in so handy until now. I'd taught Marcus to recognize them and respond to them, and now was no different. He may have been upset, but he knew to slow down when I wanted him to. After all, I clearly recalled one of our first meals together. He'd gotten too excited and wolfed down a burger only to start choking, and from then on, Marcus paid attention to my subtle warnings. After Marcus finished eating, he crawled down from his chair and hurried back to his room. I didn't stop him, though I'd hoped that he'd be more willing to talk to me if he had a full stomach. I cleaned the table, washed dishes, and then checked on his door. It was locked, like before, and I simply sighed. But I'd made a deal with him. I'd said he could go back to his room if we ate together, and I had to honor that agreement. It's an odd irony that a spy would care so much about promises and agreements, but I find it keeps me grounded and responsible, which has become so important to me now that I'm a mother to Marcus. "Good night, Marcus," I called before turning away and finding a seat on the sofa in our living room. I grabbed a book I'd been reading off the side table, The Silver Chalice, and went back to reading. I lost myself in the book for a while, not thinking about Marcus, the KGB, America, or even the former USSR. My eyes were getting drowsy after a while, and I started to put down the book when I suddenly bristled. A tingling in the palms of my hands and a shiver down the back of my neck brought me back to reality. I'd spent too long in the world of shadows and espionage to not develop that sixth sense for danger and for hidden threats. The sound of quieted movements. Someone was sneaking around. I tensed up and spun to look where the noise had come from, but then pacified immediately. It was just Marcus, standing nearby, but just out of reach. He wasn't in his pajamas yet, and his shirt was all wrinkled. There were red lines on his cheeks, caused by pressing his face hard into pillow crease, and it occurred to me he must have dozed off for a while. His face was downturned, and he had a look of embarrassment and shame. "Marcus, what is it?" "Hey," he muttered. "I'm sorry for earlier," he mumbled. "You want to tell me what's going on now?" I asked. Marcus hesitated a moment, and then nodded his head up and down. I slid over on the sofa so we could climb up, and I pat the cushion. He obeyed the offer and scrambled over, sitting on the sofa beside me. I waited patiently for him to tell me the situation. "At school today," he began, "Miss Livingston wanted us all to talk about what our parents did for a living." Marcus fiddled with his feet nervously. "Miss Livingston, age 47, black hair, brown eyes, married, a first-grade teacher for 7 years. I had met her a few times when visiting the school, and I'd done thorough research into her. Wouldn't any parent want to know what kind of teacher was looking after their child? Well, granted, most parents don't have access to what I do, but if they did, I'm sure they would make use of it like I had." Marcus continued his story. "Lots of kids said neat stuff and talked a lot about their parents. When it was my turn, His voice trailed off at this point. "You said what?" I asked. "You can tell them. You know I work at the senator's office. I've told you that." "I know," he muttered. "But I said that I didn't remember who my real parents were, but that I know what you did." My body tensed slightly, and I could already see where this was leading. And some of the kids started giggling. And then at recess, Sarah Williams called me orphan and other things. As the back of my mind plotted every conceivable way to end this Sarah Williams life, I stayed quiet and didn't move. I let him talk. There was no easy way to talk about this, and he needed to be honest with me. I cried and told them all to stop, but they didn't. The teachers made them. They said I shouldn't be ashamed, but I feel really bad. You're not my real mom, and I don't remember my real mom or dad, so are they dead or are they alive? And why didn't they want to keep me?" Tears were building up in his eyes, and I looked down quickly. Am I bad?" His voice broke, and he finally broke down into soft sobs, burying his face in my lap as he bawled. I stroked his hair, and my eyes narrowed as I recollected the answer to those very questions. I had done my research on Marcus after adopting him. He'd been put up for adoption by his real mother. She loved the bottle more than she loved her child. She'd wanted to get rid of him almost immediately. She'd handed him over to the orphanage at 2 years old. She was a no-one, a common street whore. As for her father, well, that was a little different. Marcus's father was a made man in a criminal empire that I'd heard about even when living in Russia. He was in prison serving a life sentence, and as such had not met Marcus or even knew much about him, so far as I was aware. Neither parent seemed particularly interested in their child, but Marcus didn't know that, and he didn't need to know that. My mother had always taught me that if you love someone, you always tell them the truth. But I must say, Mother was never in this situation. Would she have told him? I certainly wouldn't. It was time I do what I was skilled at. Lie. Marcus, I whispered, stroking his hair, listen to me. You're not a bad person, and your parents didn't get rid of you because you're bad. They just knew they couldn't give you the home you deserved. I felt a pang of guilt saying that because I knew it wasn't truthful, and I started to rethink my words, but why? Why should I? The lie would work. Marcus wasn't trained in seeing through deception, and he's just naive enough to believe anything. That's the beauty of children. Naivety. And yet I felt such inner anguish as the words left my lips. Why did I hate lying to him? My mother's warnings resounded in my head. If you love someone, you tell them the truth. Well, sorry, Mother. I can't do that to him. Marcus, I know your parents loved you so very much, but they couldn't... Marcus? I stopped speaking as I felt his back shifting up and down gradually. I smirked, realizing he must have cried himself into sleep. I lifted him off my lap and lay him on the sofa cushion. He could sleep here for now while I read, but my mind wasn't on the book. It was on Marcus, and why I had adopted him in the first place. When the KGB was dissolved, I'd already decided I would stay in America, but a single woman living by herself in the current economy was a little suspicious. I decided it would be best to start a family and use that to help disappear into society. The problem was I took some exception to the idea of getting married. As I said, my mother always told me that if you love someone, you're honest with them, so, inevitably, I'd have to tell him about who I really was. And if I did that, I'd be discovered anyway. But if I didn't love my husband, then I couldn't easily lie to his face. And that idea felt wrong somehow, especially since it was likely this man would love me. Love isn't something I like to lie about. It feels wrong. So marriage was not an option. So instead, I thought of adoption. The orphanage I chose was nice enough, and there were plenty of fine children there to choose from. I wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for when I was there. I wasn't picky about it being a boy or a girl, although perhaps I was a little. I never liked little girls that much. Maybe it's because I was once upon a time, and I knew how they could be. Still, in the end, it didn't matter all that much. I wasn't looking for the smartest, or the most well-behaved, or the most attractive, or the most athletic. I didn't want the best of the best. Honestly, I didn't really know what it was I wanted. And that's when it really hit me. What do I want? The cold truth about the spy business is that what you want rarely matters, and is often discouraged. You don't want to kill people, but you're ordered to, and you do it for your country. You don't want to lie and steal and cheat, but you're directed to, and you will do it. In time, you become less of a person with wants, desires, and goals, and instead become a weapon. Cold, deadly, efficient, and unfeeling. I spent years not thinking about what I really wanted and only about what my next mission was. My next job. But here I was. I had no order to adopt a child. I had no prerequisite knowledge, requests, or orders on what kind of child to seek. I didn't know what I needed, or what I wanted. I just felt I'd know it when I saw it. I was going through an inner crisis on this matter, when suddenly I met that little boy playing chess by himself. I was yanked suddenly out of my memories as I felt a tingling in my palms and the same shiver down my neck that I'd grown so used to. I knew that sensation all too well, the sensation of danger. Someone was here who wasn't supposed to be, and this time it wasn't Marcus. I rose to my feet quickly and went to my bedroom, hurrying past the modest bed and going to my bedside table. I snatched open the drawer and opened a jewelry box, which held very little jewelry, and instead was hiding a Makarov 9mm. Old habits die hard, and I could never get rid of the gun. Just as I loaded it, I heard glass breaking and the cry of Marcus as he was awoken by the noise. I darted fast into the shadows of the hallway, and I heard Marcus scrambling to his feet. I silently said a prayer that he'd run to his room and lock the door. Be smart, Marcus. Stay hidden. He wasn't trained, but surely he had the common sense to run and hide. But just as I was hoping he'd made it to safety, I heard a man's voice. "Got him!" the man snapped. His voice was slightly accented, not thick and unrecognizable. It reminded me something of Italian, and yet not quite. Another voice joined him, and I heard the muffled screams and thrashings of Marcus. "Come on, knock him out already!" came another voice, deeper than the first and older, but with a similar accent. "He won't stop thrashing! God, little shit bit me! Let me go! Mom! His screams were cut off again, but what sounded like a towel covering his mouth. "Think the lady heard that?" one of the men snapped. Based on their conversation and speech, I could draw several conclusions immediately. First is that these men weren't merely robbers or burglars. They'd targeted us, or more likely me. But how had I been exposed? Was there a mole? Did the CIA finally dig up my real identity? These guys seemed too green for CIA goons. They were talking too loudly, and they weren't subtle. Dumb as the CIA agents tended to be, they were competent enough not to break window glass when breaking and entering. So whoever they weren't trained, and that was good. The second conclusion I could draw was that they were going to use Marcus for either leverage or as bait. They targeted him first, and they knew that I existed in this house. They'd been observing us. I was sloppy, predictable, and that would change after tonight. But first I had a child to rescue. I leaned against the wall and controlled my breathing, and prepared. If you've never taken a life, you can't possibly understand how it feels to kill. But even a murderer can't comprehend the headspace of an assassin. I've killed plenty of people, and each time I've learned how to approach it. I inhale slowly and carefully through my nose and out my lips, letting out a soft hiss. With each exhale, I let my mind rest and my limbs loosen. Being too tense makes you stiff and can make reactions slow. Let go of the notion that they're human. Forget that they're people. They're nothing but meat. Targets across a firing range. Feel nothing for them because they aren't worth the air they breathe. You never lose this instinct. It just waits to be released. I stepped out fluidly and quickly, gun drawn, and aimed it at the scene before me. "Drop the boy or die!" I took in the setting instantly. 2 attackers, both male. One was tall, wearing a puffy jacket with jeans on and a ski cap. He had on wool gloves and was holding Marcus's wriggling body with a towel over his face. He had dirt on his face and a scar on his left cheek. The second man was holding a baseball bat with little shimmering specks on it. The tool obviously used to break open the window to my apartment. I imagined, anyway. He wasn't near Marcus. He was exposed. I could shoot him, but if he moved too fast, Marcus would be put in the line of fire. I couldn't shoot unless I could remove him as a threat. The 2 men stared in confusion, and that momentary flicker of doubt and hesitation on their face was all the time I needed. I closed fast and struck the butt of my pistol into the temple of the one holding Marcus. He let out a cry of pain as he fell, and I raised my foot and slammed it down on the back of his head, making a thudding sound that told me his head had collided with the wooden floor. He didn't move, and that was enough for me. Marcus let out a cry and rolled across the floor, scrambling to get away. I couldn't focus on him, though. By removing Marcus from the intruder, I could now focus on both men with full efficiency. The second thug reacted a bit quicker. He lunged at me with a ham-like fist and hit it across my cheek. But I'd been hit by a lot bigger and tougher brutes during my training days. I rolled with the strike and then collided my elbow with the back of his head. The same moment I kicked his calf and he fell to his knees. Gasping in shock and pain, I then turned my gun on him and fired once into his exposed left hand. Marcus shrieked at the sound of the gun, and the man roared with pain as a hole punched his left hand, blood dribbling from it. "Gah!" he screamed. "Crazy bitch! I'll kill—" I placed my foot on the back of his head and stood hard on it, digging my weight into it, making him shout. His friend, who was still reeling from the kick to the back of his head, was groaning. I leaned down and struck him in the back of the head again, knocking him out totally. I then pointed the pistol at the only conscious punk with his own bleeding hand. I then gave a cough. "You're going to shut your mouth and listen to me very carefully, or the next round goes through the back of your head," I hissed, letting my American accent slip to reveal my true, home-born Russian accent. The sound of my real accent sent a chill through the man, and I could visibly see him go rigid. I've tried my best to always hide my true speaking voice. Most people in this day and age find the Russian accent I was raised with frightening. But I wanted him scared, and I also didn't want him able to identify my voice too easily. I raised my pistol and shot the overhead light bulb and the lamp by the couch to kill any ambient light, plunging the room into darkness to add to the fear factor and to prevent my face from being seen. I could hear Marcus sobbing, but I couldn't risk looking at him now. I could barely see him anyway, and I returned my aim to the attacker. The hell? You're a Kremlin? The thug whispered. I'll be asking the questions, I snarled. Why did you break into my house? And why do you want the boy? I demanded. Up yours, lady, he snarled. My eyes narrowed as I glared angrily. Marcus, sweetheart, cover your ears. I didn't wait to see if he'd done as I told him before I fired a single shot into the man's right calf. Gah! He started to roll forward, grasping his leg and screaming bloody murder. Wrong answer, I sneered. I then kicked his face away from me so he couldn't see me. I placed the gun up against the skin of his head and leaned close so he could hear my words. I am in America for an undercover operation, and I can't count all the fools I've killed to maintain this cover. One more soul won't make any difference to me. Weigh your next words very carefully before you open your disgusting mouth. This bit of information had the desired effect. You're all right. I'll say anything. I'll talk. Please, I'll talk. He squealed through tears of agony. Good. He lost that rebellious fire. I won't say that Americans are easier to break than Russians, as I've broken both under the right circumstances, but I do find that American bravado often fades faster. But perhaps I haven't interrogated one of my own kinsmen recently. Why did you break into my house? I asked dangerously. Answer honestly. We were hired, he squealed. I swear, it wasn't anything personal. We were hired to get the boy, that's it. This surprised me. I tried not to let it show, but luckily, if I did, the dark room made it much harder for him to notice. I glanced where I assumed Marcus was, and could just make out his silhouette. The boy, I growled. Not me. No, we were told to kill you if you resisted. Not that I wanted to kill you. I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry. It's just a job. It's just a job. His blabbering was irritating me further. I stamped my foot on his back again and cocked the gun I was holding, unnecessarily as a cue for him to stop talking. I don't care if it was a job. Who hired you? I growled. Why do they want the boy? I can't tell. I'll die. Marcus, cover your ears, I repeated, and then fired a round so close to the crying mobster's ear that I saw burn marks appear on his earlobe. His squeal reminded me something of a pig. Ah! Lady, please! He'll kill me! And I'm less threatening? Then I guess we're done talking, then. That knowledge brought the truth out of him fast. We work for Tony Carzoni! My eyes narrowed at the name. What? Tony Carzoni! We were hired by Tony Carzoni, that's who! He repeated, blubbering. I knew the name, and I can guess what he wanted. I turned my head towards Marcus and carefully adopted my motherly American voice that he knew. Marcus, I said calmly, and noticed his silhouette perk up at my American voice. I want you to go to your room, lock the door, and hide under the bed. Don't listen to a word that I say or what he says. Do you understand me? Marcus didn't move. Marcus, go, and don't listen to what we're saying. Now. Mom, do as I say. Now. I repeated firmer this time. Marcus finally let out a squeak and ran from the living room into his bed. I waited a moment for him to lock the door and for him to get under the bedroom. Once I heard his body shifting on the floor for him to crawl under, I turned my gaze back to the punk at my feet. What does Carzoni want here? I snapped. My Russian tone returned, and more threatening than ever. He told us to find the kid, so we went to the orphanage where his mom dropped him off, but they said he'd been adopted. We came here because this was the address listed on his adoption papers. The man replied fearfully. I sneered at this. There was no lie in his tone, which made me even angrier. I kind of wanted to shoot him now. What does that rat want with his son after all this time? He didn't even know he had a kid until after the kid's mom died, the man answered. I felt my eyes widen involuntarily at this news. Marcus's mother was dead? I mean, the life of a common whore isn't a long one normally, but I hadn't expected to hear that. Still, I maintained my cool and listened to the rest of the man's story. She died about 3 or 4 months ago, I think. The boss wanted to know if she had any next of kin, and the hospital records revealed she had a child. I guess he got interested. Wants an heir, maybe? I don't know. He didn't really explain, but my best guess is he wants someone to run the business for him and carry on his name. Look, Lady, I don't know the details. Like I said, it was just a job. I stayed silent a long moment and processed this new information. Marcus's mother was dead, meaning that Rachel Thorne was gone. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her, but I did feel a pang of hurt for Marcus. Though he didn't know anything about his mother, no child wanted to be told the woman who birthed him is deceased. But worse than that, Tony Carzoni, Marcus's father, was now aware he had a son. And rather than ignore Marcus, Tony wants the boy in his life, and likely for no good reason. A mob boss and serving a life sentence in prison, Tony's likely objective was to groom Marcus to take over his criminal enterprise. I sneered at the prospect. I was ending this matter tonight. I knelt down low and hissed with as much venom as my voice could muster. What's your name? Ricky, he answered. And your friend? I indicated his unconscious friend. Charlie, he replied. Ricky, the only reason you're not dead, I whispered, is because it would traumatize that child to see 2 dead bodies on the floor of his home. The man glanced back at me, but I struck him hard, turning him away. I couldn't let him see my face. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave with your unconscious friend. You're going to tell your boss that his son is no longer his concern. You're going to stress the serious consequences of pissing me off. And if you ever come back here again, there won't be enough left of you for even your mother to identify your body. Ricky looked mortified. Are you serious? I can't tell the boss that, the man squealed. He'll kill me! Do you think I won't? I challenged. He didn't answer that. I want you to listen very closely to me, Ricky. If you look for me again, if you come near this house again, if I even find out you followed my son to school. He felt the hot steel of my gun barrel on the side of his face, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a grown man peeing his pants. I get it, I'll tell him, he yelled. I'll tell him to give up on the kid. I don't know if I believe you, Ricky. Convince me. You'll never hear from me again, I swear it. It's over. I'll tell Carzoni and I'll run away. I'll go far away. You won't ever see his face again. You won't see mine. You won't see Charlie's. I swear it on my mother's grave. Good. His voice was cracking with fear, and I knew I didn't need to draw this out anymore. I removed my foot from his back. Now get your friend and get out of my house. The thugs left the way they came in after about 20 minutes. It took them considerable time given that I'd shot Ricky through the calf and he was struggling to limp away. A dumb decision on my part in hindsight. I made an assessment of the damages caused. It would take some time to clean up the blood splatter and broken glass, and I'd also destroyed a perfectly good lamp and light bulb fixture over the living room, but those were replaceable. Nothing was too terribly damaged. I walked to Marcus's room and knocked on the door. I heard a small squeak from the other side, and I sighed. It's safe, I said softly. Let me in, Marcus. There was a short pause, and suddenly the door opened, and Marcus stood there, fear in his eyes. I looked down at those eyes, sadly, and I quickly dropped down to inspect him for injuries. As my hands reached out to him, he withdrew fast. I flinched and tried again. Are you all right? You're not hurt, are you? He backed up and out of reach, as if my hand was a serpent. Marcus, I'm sorry. You had a gun, Marcus whimpered. I looked at him sadly, and I lowered my hands to my lap. Marcus didn't know about my gun. I'd made it a rule for him to never go into my jewelry box. I told him it was because some of the pins were sharp, and seeing as Marcus didn't like shots or needles, that was enough for him to stay away. He had no idea about what was really in it. Yes, I did, I answered slowly and calmly, but I put it away. And you didn't talk normal, he whimpered. Why did you talk so weird? I had never spoken in my native tongue or accent around Marcus. I never wanted him to think that his mother was dangerous somehow. But now that was past. I felt such agony at his expression, and I finally began to understand what my mother meant. If you love someone, you're honest with them. And now I understood why. The lie I'd told him, the lie I'd lived for Marcus. Now that it was shattered, I was left with shame and pain, and I needed to fix this. I'll tell you everything, I whispered. I led him into his room, though he was dragging his feet. Was it out of fear of me, or simply overwhelmed by all that he'd experienced that night? I wasn't entirely sure, but I was about to make his night far more difficult for him. The last thing I wanted to do. We sat on the bed, and I told him. I told him every detail. I was a KGB special intelligence operative sent to America to steal intelligence and information. I was raised to hate America and the West, but in time I grew to love this country and couldn't follow through on my mission. With the KGB disbanded, I now wanted a normal life. I then told him about his father, Tony Carzoni, a big player in the Sicilian mafia. I told him about his mother. I left out the part about her being a prostitute, but I did mention her alcoholism and disinterest in being a mother. I told him that those men wanted him because Tony wanted to make him his next heir. I told him everything, and he listened. Wide-eyed, maybe a little dumbfounded. When I finally finished, he was clearly in shock, and he shook his head. I slid closer to him on the bed, and he shoved me away, his lip quivering and his eyes darting around as if searching for some way out of the truth. And I knew that look. I'd seen it in interrogation subjects who just had all their dirty laundry and secrets laid out in front of them. The truth was clear as day, and they couldn't accept it, searching for some way out. I'd never felt pity for those men or women, because trying to run from the truth never gets you anywhere. But right now, my heart was breaking for Marcus. No, it's not real, he whimpered. I put a hand on his knee, and he jumped away from me. You're a spy! He threw the words at me like a stone, and I took the blow, trying not to show how that accusation hurt. I was, I answered. You just used me! You never loved me, he cried. The words bit me like a rabid animal, and I flinched. Marcus, please listen to me. And my real mom hated me too! You promised she didn't give me up! You promised! I flinched again. My mother's line kept digging into my soul. Tears were rolling down Marcus's face, and he wouldn't let me near him to help him. Marcus, I'm sorry. I was scared that if you knew all this, it would only hurt you. He didn't answer, but started crying and rubbing his knuckles against his eyes to stop the tears. But they kept coming. I wanted to move in to hold him, to comfort him. I made a subtle shift, and to my surprise, he must have felt it, because he shrieked and jumped off the bed to evade me. His red, puffy eyes were brimming with pain-filled tears as he sobbed and shouted at me. Nobody wants me! Nobody! He cried. Why? He cried harder and bolted from the room. I ran after him and saw him making a move for the door, but I was faster and pulled him back. He lashed back and wriggled like an eel. Marcus, I pleaded, Marcus, please listen to me. Let me go! He tore from my grip and ran for the sofa to hide behind it, only to trip and collapse on the cushion. He didn't get up, only bawling into the sofa cushion. He didn't have any energy to get up and run again. I finally moved forward and I threw my arms around him. This time he didn't throw me off. He just bawled. I held him like this for a long time, rocking him as he cried into my sweater. I remembered looking back on when I'd met him. The day I'd met Marcus, he'd sat there all alone with a chessboard in front of him. He'd been moving the pieces slowly and just staring at it. I'd come to ask his name. He said it was Marcus, and I asked if he knew how to play chess. He said he didn't. I was confused and asked why he was moving the pieces if he didn't know how to play. He looked me in the eyes and said, I don't know. I just wanted to try. I sat down with him and asked if he wanted to learn. He said yes, and I tried to teach him, and he listened. But the conversation turned to other things. We talked about games, school, mothers. He said he didn't know his mother, so I told him about mine. As we talked, I began to realize something I didn't understand at the time, but now, holding this crying boy, I did. Something I never thought I'd understand, or even care about. I was being honest with Marcus for the first time, and that meant telling him everything. Everything I was feeling. Marcus, I've done a lot of things, I whispered to him. Some good, some bad. I did terrible things. I've killed people. I've stolen things, and I've lied. But I never did any of those things because I wanted to. I did them because it's what I needed to do. I was required to do them. I was ordered to do those things by my country, so I did them because I loved my country. The sobs were softer now, but still there. I squeezed him gently and whispered, Marcus, when you're a spy, you don't get to decide what you want. You're told what to want. So none of the things I've done are things that I wanted to do. But do you want to know a secret, Marcus? I leaned back and lifted his chin up slightly so his eyes could look into mine. Tears were rolling down his face, but I could tell we were actually looking at each other. Adopting you, Marcus? I didn't need to do that. You weren't part of any mission or part of any cover-up. It's true, I wanted to start a family to hide my identity, but choosing you, adopting you, that's the first thing in a long time I've done because I wanted to do it. You're the one thing I wanted, Marcus. I wanted you, and I will always want you. You're lying, Marcus whimpered, hiccuping and rubbing his eyes again. You're just a mean Russia spy. I was a spy, Marcus. I was. I don't deny it. And I won't lie and pretend like I regret some of the things I did either. But I didn't adopt you because of my country. I did not take you into my home because I was ordered to or because you were some convenience. I slowly turned his eyes to me again. You aren't the perfect son, Marcus. You're impatient, you're noisy, your grades are average, and you aren't the most physically fit. I poked his belly in a teasing manner, which to my relief got a giggle out of him. But do you know what drew me to you? I lifted his little chin with a finger to keep him from looking away again. You wanted to learn. You wanted to know more about the world, about life, about yourself. You're an inquisitive and curious mind, and you are wonderful for it. I've been taking care of you these last 8 months and have been loving every minute of it. Don't tell me nobody wants you. Marcus was sniffling, but his eyes stayed trained on me. Your real mother may not have wanted you, but I want you. You're the one thing I've wanted more than anything else, more than my country, more than this country, more than my own life. And if you think I'm lying, then I'll live every moment of the rest of my life proving it to you. We sat there quietly a moment until Marcus's little lips quivered. I am so sorry, Marcus. I'm sorry for ever lying to you, but I love you with all my heart, and that is the truth. Mom? He threw his arms around me and sobbed into my breast, screaming, holding me with all his might. And I felt tears building in my own eyes as I held him. I stroked his hair and leaned down to kiss his head. I love you, Marcus. I really do. My name is Anastasia Vasiliev. I was a KGB operator for the USSR. I have killed men without blinking, lied without remorse, stolen without guilt. I did all that was asked of me by my country without question and without pause. But there's one person who I cannot lie to, who I cannot hurt, who I love more than my country or this one. Because when you love someone, you're honest with them. And as truth finally slipped from my heart and out for Marcus to hear, I felt such relief wash over me that I found myself falling over with my son as we lay together on the couch. Asleep at last. My arms held on to the one thing I wanted most in this whole rotten world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is The Thing I Wanted, written by me for my parents this Christmas. So, let me know what y'all think while I drink something after that. Ugh, that was rough. I wrote it for my parents because I know that they like this kind of stuff. They like good stories with more wholesome endings. And they also like spy thrillers and law thrillers and stuff like that, so I knew that they'd like this one. I hope you guys liked that. That was a lot of fun to read. Again, very long one. In fact, funny enough... excuse me, I'm sorry. 1 second. If I can do this, I'd like to. Well, if you guys, while I'm fixing something up real quick, give me just a second, and y'all can let me know what you'd like me to do next. Would you like another short story, or would you like me to go ahead and dive into New Epoch? Y'all can let me know. Alright, well, it seems a lot of y'all enjoyed it. I'm getting some requests for New Epoch. Alright, New Epoch. Alright. We'll do one or two chapters of New Epoch, then we'll do another short story. Alright. New Epoch it is. New Epoch it is. Alright. New Epoch. Picking up. Alright. I think we left off on chapter 10. New Epoch chapter 10. Yep, that's correct. And this chapter was published March 3rd, 2020. So, let's do it. It had been a week since their fight. Grognar hadn't mentioned a word of what had happened between Titania and him to anyone. Meanwhile, Josiah grew more and more fierce and angry at the realization that an archangel was hiding just beyond his reach. As Grognar finished the next helmet for his commission, he cleaned sweat from his brow. The other dwarves and men working in the forge with him glanced at Grognar with concern on their faces. "Hey, boss, take a break, huh? Entrust you boys with the work, not on your life." "Well, you haven't been yourself lately, boss. Not since Josiah." None dared say what Josiah had done in their last meeting with him. Josiah had been true to his threat. Grognar's sister had already been put to work in the mines below the citadel to mine out iron ore for weapons and armor that Grognar could use. As for his mother, the less he knew about her fate right now, the better. He was furious with Titania right now, livid with Josiah, and every part of Grognar's being wanted to hit something or someone. If only the cataclysm hadn't made him a 40-year-old dwarf, he could... No, better not to dwell on that. "All right, guess I could use some fresh air. I'll be right back." Grognar climbed out of the forge below his workshop and walked out the front door, a pipe in hand. The cool air hit him like a splash of water, relief from his fatigue striking all at once. He shook his head and tugged on his beard nervously, walking out into the bustling street. How the world had changed since the cataclysm he couldn't quite describe. This town that was simply named the Citadel used to be the town square of a local country. But so many buildings had been devastated and fallen to ruin. A few had been rebuilt into making shift homes or shops, while some had been left as rubble. Some supplies from these wrecks had been used to fortify the wall around the Citadel and to renovate the museum, which now acted as Josiah's palace. Orcs wandered around like aimless zombies, occasionally grunting and cursing at each other furiously. A few humans and halflings hobbled about too, doing menial tasks. Shops and storefronts were busy now, vital for gaining food. Farms and agriculture could only be found outside the Citadel, which meant that farmers had to come in to sell their produce. Currency in Orkshire was built on trade. What you had, you traded for what you could. 3 loaves of bread and 2 pounds of corn might have been worth maybe 2 killed rabbits and a chicken egg. It often depended on the seller for the bargain, which is why even being a shop owner could be dangerous. If an orc didn't like the bargain made, he'd gladly make you a new offer you couldn't refuse. Grognar had little reason to complain, though. He was incredibly well off, all things considered. There were other blacksmiths in Orkshire, but none like him in his craftsman's lodge. He could charge a reasonable selling rate and keep his family fed. Since his father worked directly under Josiah, he rarely would come home, not like he was much wanted to come home in the first place, so it was a lot easier to see that they were fed. But every now and then a trader or caravan would pass by. They were more than willing to trade, but often had strange coins or currency with them as well, sometimes very rare and expensive artifacts. It was rather easy to spot a foreigner, for they often were smiling broadly and excitedly, not realizing that they would only continue to breathe because Josiah knew expelling all foreign commerce would be disastrous. A young man could now be seen walking by a stall not far from Grognar's shop. He wore black robes and a pair of glasses on his face, though there was a crack on the right lens. He had dirty blonde hair and deep blue eyes that were not so different from a dog's. He had a smile on his face, but it felt forced, like he was trying to hide a different inclination. His hands were bandaged at the knuckle, and he had a single sword strapped to his waist. The stall the young man was working was filled with vials, jars, pastes, and minerals. A small fire was burning under a beaker where smoke was trickling out. The classic sign of an alchemist. After the cataclysm, many old minerals became imbued with properties of arcane origin. Alchemy was a class that many former scientists and doctors gravitated towards as they worked to better understand the new nature of the world and its properties. Grognar looked to see that the young man was holding a red vial of something and speaking to a very familiar elf. "Eivor, Grognar called, walking over, but grunting once again. He'd moved too quickly and upset his broken rib. Aenor looked at Grognar and then scowled. You stubborn fool, what are you doing here? I told you to stay in bed, he snapped. I'm fine, Grognar grumbled. I'm hoping if I finish this commission, just I will feel merciful to my family. Who's your friend? He asked. The young man held out his hand politely for Grognar to shake. Philip Archon, pleasure to meet you. Alchemist, I take it? I was actually going to graduate from Yale before the cataclysm with a degree in biochemistry and pharmacy, he laughed. Grognar blinked, disbelieving. Are you serious? You barely look 20 years old, and Yale fell to pieces 10 years ago. How could you... I was one of the few who aged backwards with the cataclysm, if you can believe it, Philip shrugged. Instead of aging up 10 years, like many others did, I backed up 10. I'm technically 31 years old, but I know I look much younger, he explained. Still, I can't complain too much, can I? I'm still getting to do what I love. Philip comes here every year or so to trade medicines and herbs with me, Aenor explained further. I always run out too quickly. Well, I've told you to either buy in bulk or use sparingly. My stuff works miracles, Philip teased. As they laughed, Grognar's mind suddenly started racing. A crazy thought just entered his head. He's the key to killing Jasai. Blemish, Grognar whispered. Oh, what's that? Aenor, Philip, if I take you to a specific patient, do you think you could, work a miracle? Grognar asked. Aenor and Philip exchanged glances and Aenor shrugged. I suppose I could take a look. Bring them to my office. And I can't bring them here. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm not welcome where he's at right now. But if you go to Titania's cabin in the... Aenor's face turned to a sneer and he shook his head. I'd rather not visit that demon. And I don't know why you'd want to either, considering the damage she did to you in your last visit. To be honest, I kind of brought this on myself deliberately. But that's not the point. I think, is there something going on I don't know about? Philip asked curiously. Grognar felt his eyes glaring daggers at him, and he sighed, realizing he couldn't put the cork back in the bottle. All right, lads, come in for a drink, and I'll tell you everything I can. After helping Philip park his stall and lock it down, he led the two into his workshop where he could tell them the whole story. Sitting them down in his back room, setting down mugs of warm mead, he sat back and lit his pipe before beginning the story. The story of an assassin, a demon, and 2 escaped slaves. Unbelievable, Philip whispered. An archangel here in Orkshire. It can only mean trouble, Aenor growled. Where's one Inquisition agent shows up, others likely will appear also. Philip nodded at that, and Grognar leaned forward. Listen, I'm not too fond of Titania right now. She and I, aren't on speaking terms, but one thing I do agree with her about is this. As long as Jasai's alive, we're all his slaves. None of us are really free. Blemish is a trained killer. He might be the ticket to ending Jasai and everything that he stands for, Grognar explained. But with his injuries, he's nothing more than dead weight. And you think we can miraculously cure him? Aenor asked. I'm sure I have a few herbs or potions that could speed up the healing process, Philip muttered. Anything that can help, Grognar urged. But first we have to settle on a price, he snapped. These things aren't cheap, and if you want my help, you need to be ready to offer up something. Aenor looked disapprovingly at Philip. Well, what do you want? Grognar asked. Well, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't even be willing to bargain. I have no love for the Inquisition, especially not for its assassins. They kill who they please in the name of God, and I can't think of anything more twisted. Reminds me of those ragheads from... Watch it. Oh, shut up, Aenor. You were in the Marines back then. Didn't you do tours in Iraq during... We're off topic, Grognar snapped. What's the price of your services? Philip inhaled deeply and then crossed his fingers. So no, I'm normally not interested in helping any assassins from that heretical cult, Philip continued. But I hate orcs way more than I hate the Inquisition. Any particular reason? Aenor asked curiously. Well, that's a personal matter. I'd rather not go into it right now if it's all the same to you. Long story short, I'll do it. But in return, I want in on the operation. The operation? Come on, like those old heist movies back in the day. Planning some big break-in or murder. I want in on it. I want to help take down Jasai, Philip answered. It would be cathartic for me. You promise me a chance to get in on this action, and I'll give you whatever you need to patch up the zealot. Well, what can you provide? Grognar asked. Now hold up a second, Aenor interrupted, raising his hand between the two. You both realize what you're suggesting here is nothing short of treason, right? It could cost all of us, and more, our very lives. Yeah, more or less, Grognar nodded. I'm out. I won't be part of this. Aenor shook his head. I won't be responsible for more death, not directly or indirectly. I gave up all that. And I won't be dragged back into it. Not even for you. Aenor, this isn't like the Cataclysm. It's not Holly, Grognar tried to reason. Don't say her name. Don't say her name to me, Grognar. Don't. She's not the only reason anyway. You're asking me to work with Titania. And an assassin, no less. You're asking me to treat him. For a cause, Aenor. Who are you to talk, Grognar? You had gone to Titania specifically to turn the kid over to Josiah, and now you want to save him. You want to pick a side and stick with it? Aenor asked. It's not that simple, Aenor. To me, it is. Well, I'm not you, am I? Grognar retorted. Philip sighed, interrupting the argument. He swigged his mead from his mug and leaned across the table, speaking in little more than a murmur. You know, maybe it's not my place to say so, but I think the sides are pretty clear here. Grognar, Aenor has every right to be hesitant about this. Like I said, neither of us are that interested in helping a bigoted killer. One that even you wanted dead a week ago. I understand that, but... Grognar is right too, friend, Philip turned to Aenor darkly. There's a difference between swearing an oath of nonviolence and turning a blind eye to evil. I killed a dozen men in the Middle East. I killed men and women and children during the Cataclysm. I even killed... No, I won't be part of it again. I'm a doctor now, not a soldier. No one is asking you to pick a goddamn weapon here, Aenor. Just help us heal a wounded kid. A kid who's going to kill more people when he's better, Aenor argued. I'm sorry, but knowing what you intend to do with him when I'm done helping him, I can't willingly help with that. Well then, you're a coward, Aenor, Philip growled. Say what you want about me, but you're a coward and a hypocrite. You won't help that kid because you're scared of what he might kill, while you turn your back on the people Josiah has already killed and continues to kill, Philip snarled. Aenor and Grognar both stayed silent for a long moment. He then tossed his mug aside and grit his teeth angrily. But who am I to talk? Any of us. You, me, Grognar? What are we, anyway? Damn it all, but let's face it. We're all cowards and hypocrites. I mean, just look at us. We're not fighters, Philip. No, but do we have to be to make a difference? We're sitting around here just debating about whether or not to do the right thing. And since when did we have to debate to do what was right? You know what we are? We're just good men doing nothing. Grognar hopped down and picked up the mug, cleaning it off with his shirt as Aenor sat silently down at the table, staring at his hands. This isn't about Josiah, or about the Inquisition, or Orkshire. It's about doing the right thing, when we know what it obviously is. Life is never that black and white, Aenor remarked. Well, in this case it is, Philip answered. Grognar sat silent for a long moment, taking in what they'd said, remembering what Titania had said the other night. He was still mad at her, and yet he could feel the truth in her warnings, her pleas. Had she seen things this way too? My family is in danger, Grognar explained. We all have something to lose here. Well, not you, Aenor glanced at Philip. If we can't take down Josiah, I'll be implicated too. I doubt he'll show me much mercy either, Philip laughed. My point is that I think Philip is right. I think it's time to make a move. Except where do we even start, Aenor asked. How do we go about this coup? It starts with blemish, Grognar grumbled in defeat. As much as I hate to admit it, if anyone knows how to plan an assassination, it would be that boy. Which means, if we want a shot, we have to treat the child, Aenor finally groaned. Fine. Fine, damn it all, fine. I'll take a look at his injuries. We'll meet at Aenor's tunnel tonight. Philip, bring whatever you think will be useful. Well, what about you? Philip asked. Me? Hell, I'm not sure I should go with you. After the way Titania and I left things, I might not be very welcome there, Grognar sighed. Decide later, Aenor muttered darkly. We move at midnight. If you're not there, then go on ahead, Grognar explained. And guys, thank you. Well, don't thank us yet. We haven't agreed to anything other than to take a look at the kid and that Josiah does need to go down, Aenor warned. But I think we can all agree, Philip stepped in, that whatever happens, I'd say we're all in this one together. And that was Chapter 10, ladies and gentlemen. Chapter 10. What did you think? What did you think? Did y'all enjoy that one? Woo. I saw some of the chat posts. So to answer a couple of things that people were saying about how your biggest critique of my short story for my parents is that it didn't have any Christian basis. Not all of my stories do. Some of my stories are just secular. I am a Christian, but I do write all kinds of different stories, not just Christian-based stories. Although most of my stories do have a Christian theme, but still, I wouldn't consider that a critique. It's just lacking. It just doesn't have the thing you're most interested in. Wait, who's Philip? Philip is an alchemist who they've just met who's willing to help them defeat Josiah. It's cool, didn't pay that much attention though, sadly. Well, I mean, I can't help that. All right. Any more we need to do? Y'all want me to go to chapter 11, or do we take a break? Do we go to chapter 11, or are we taking a break? Let me know. Let me know. Need to get something to drink. Can we get a quick explanation of the world? Basically, there was a cataclysm that took place in the world, and now the entire world has switched from the world we know into a fantasy world where several humans have transformed into fantasy races. Some have changed ages by leaping forward 10 years or going backwards 10 years. Some have changed genders. Some have changed into monsters. Some don't even remember who they are anymore. But the point is that a lot of people have gone through changes. And right now there is, in this world, I'll pull up something that might help. This might help you guys a little bit. 1 second. Okay, so what I've pulled up here is a map. It's essentially a map that Lark and I created for this world. Now this, the blue country that you see, this is basically the United States after the cataclysm was done. As you can see, the United States and Canada was basically torn apart. And that blue country right smack dab in the middle is Orkshire. And that is where the main story is taking place. And if you would like the full details, basically the whole world has been broken up into kind of like a feudal state where different territories rule themselves. And right now we're telling the story of a small story within Orkshire. So that is what is going on right now. But anyway, now you know. If you ever go woke, I won't forgive you, Raven. Seed, I respect you as a brother in Christ, but you're very slowly starting to sound like a troll right now. I don't know why you think I'd go woke. Like, what about me would ever make you think that? The fact that I wrote a secular story? I'm almost regretting sharing that story. Some of y'all have not taken it well. Like, I saw some of your chat from that story. Like, some of y'all were just mocking the fact that she was KGB, that she was Russian. I don't appreciate that. I'll be real. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get to reading the next one, but I'm a little disappointed now. All right, anyway, moving on. New Epoch, Chapter 11. This one was written March 4th, 2020. Grognar led their little group up the mountain path to Titania's cabin. As they drew closer, they could see the faint sight of smoke drifting up lazily from the cabin. Grognar allowed himself and slowed down, falling behind Aenor and Philip. Philip took notice and smiled encouragingly. He gave Grognar a pat on the shoulder and urged him along up the hillside. Titania was there, sitting on the deck once more, and she was sharpening her greatsword with a whetstone. As she heard footsteps, she stood up quickly, drawing the sword fast. Her eyes fell on the three newcomers, and she blinked. "Who are—" "Titania," Grognar muttered darkly, not coming out from behind Philip and Aenor. "This is, Aenor, the elvish doctor from town. And this is Philip, an alchemist. I thought, we thought We wanted to take a look at Blemish, Philip explained for Grognar. We think the fastest way to deal with Josiah is through him, so we want him back on his feet and fighting condition as quickly as he can. And you think you can do that? She asked. Well, I don't know. I have to look at his injuries, Aenor growled, not making eye contact with Titania. She sneered back at him and then glared at Grognar. He's inside. She stood aside and walked inside with the three visitors. Grognar shuffled his feet as he followed, but after a few moments, did follow inside the warm cabin. Blemish was sitting in a chair by the table with the Bible beside him. He'd been staring at it, as if trying to make sense of the words. As he saw the three men enter behind Titania, he stiffened and adjusted the mask on his face. Are you an assassin? Philip asked. Yes. We'd like to look at your wounds, please. Blemish's eyes flashed at Titania, who gave a slow nod of encouragement. Upon seeing this, he relaxed and lowered his guard a little. Philip pulled a small pouch from his coat and walked to Blemish, holding it up. Would you mind smelling this bag for me? Blemish leaned forward to sniff the bag, and within a few seconds he was falling forward unconscious. What are you doing? Titania shouted. Just giving him a nap, Philip explained. I need to give him a thorough examination so I can figure out how to best treat him. If he's awake and defensive, then it'll be more difficult, Aenor explained. Kindly lift his body onto the table. Titania snarled angrily. That was dirty. You could have at least told me that's what you wanted. Then he might have resisted. Are you going to argue with us or let us help you? Aenor asked. Titania, Grognar grumbled. Titania shot a look back at him, which caused him to glance away quickly. She got the message, though, and finally lowered her tone of voice. If you hurt him, I won't. I'm a doctor first, Aenor replied. Titania walked to Blemish and lifted his small form onto the table. Aenor began working immediately, undoing the bandages on Blemish's body to inspect them. This could take some time. Be patient with me. Aenor plopped down by the table and waited. Grognar looked past them toward the living room quarters, where Jennifer was sitting up next to Mariel, fast asleep. She looked at everyone warily but quietly. Seemed the whole gang was still here. No one had escaped yet. You! Grognar jumped at the sound of Titania's voice and she motioned to the door. Outside. Now! Grognar didn't say a word as he followed Titania outside, leaving Aenor to his work. The night air was much colder than the inside of the cabin, and being outside made Grognar even more uneasy, as this was where he and Titania had fought. Titania, Grognar whispered softly. Why'd you bring them here, Ethan? She demanded. Is this a trick? No, he said. I thought about the things you said, and I felt like maybe you might have had a point about Josiah needing to be killed. Well, good, Titania sneered. Grognar shook his head. It doesn't mean we're cool, though, does it? No, not by a long shot, Titania hissed. Grognar leaned against the post of the cabin and reached for his pipe, but then stopped. It was a bad idea to start smoking around her right now, not when she was still liable to hit him. That rage was still in her face. The things I said to you, I shouldn't have. Don't, Titania snarled furiously. Don't bother with any apologies right now. I won't accept them. Okay, Grognar muttered defeatedly. Then how can we put this behind us? Well, we can start with this. Titania grabbed Grognar by his long beard and yanked him hard. Grognar let out a shout as she raised him up, pulling on his facial hair and snarling like a furious beast. If you ever try to get me to kill you again, I really will. Ow, 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 let me go, let me go, let me go! Titania hurled him to the ground angrily and her fists were shaking. Do you know how close I came that night? Do you know how angry I was? The things you said, the way you hurt me, all of that was just to get me to kill you? Do you even take one moment to think how I'd feel killing the only goddamn friend I have? Do you ever think that maybe I need you too? Titania gnashed her teeth and let out a roar of rage as she stamped her foot. I know we're not family, and believe me, I'm upset and worried for them too, but you think I'd want to have you killed? That I'd enjoy knowing I killed my only friend? I was grieving. I was scared. Oh, of course, and that makes it okay. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, but nothing, Titania screamed, raising her fist again, but then putting it aside, fuming furiously. Do you know how close I came to killing you? Ethan, I'm an ogre. My adrenaline and fighting instincts are heightened, and you pushed me so close to killing you. I don't even care about those insults. They don't hurt as much as why you said them. Stupid, evil, violent, big-titted. Hell, the orcs say that to me on the regular, and I couldn't care less. But you? I couldn't understand why you would say them. I didn't understand, and so I got so angry, and I could have... And I hated myself for it. Until you told me that's why you wanted. You were going to use me. Use me. And what was I going to do, huh? How am I supposed to live with the blood on my hands when my best friend kills himself willingly by me? Grogner shook his head. I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry, David. You're sorry. Oh, you're sorry. Ethan, No, I can't right now. Titania closed her eyes, exhaling long and slowly. David, I'm sorry for what I did. There's no excuse. I won't make an excuse, but just, can you at least understand how I felt? Of course I can't understand. I can't understand how you felt. Because you're in a position so difficult, I don't want to think about it. I get that you were desperate, and I can even understand some of that desperation, but to use me as your loaded gun, to turn me into your murderer? Grognar didn't speak, but just bowed his head. I don't know if I can overlook this one, Groggy. I don't know if I want you to, Grognar admitted. Frankly, I'm terrified that things can't be the same between us now. Well, friends come and go, don't they? Titania asked. Not like this and not now, he replied. You're all I have, too. What I did was unfair, and I regret it. But I stand by my fears and my uncertainties. I stand by the fact that I was desperate and trying to find a way out. It was wrong to use you and to manipulate you, and I definitely regret insulting you like I did. You are my best friend, David. I want you to forgive me, even if I know I don't deserve it. Titania stared at Grognar a moment, then shook her head. I don't know, Ethan. I don't know. I need time to think about it. I understand. I don't know if you do. You may not understand it, but right now, it hurts to see you, knowing what you did. Titania turned and walked back to the cabin door, but paused, placing a hand on the wood, a tremble running up her spine. Until I've decided if I can forgive you, don't call me David anymore, okay? Okay. Got it. Nothing more was said as Titania walked back into the cabin. Grognar stayed outside and contemplated their conversation. He had been so afraid that Titania would be furious, and she still was. A part of him was glad that she hadn't just outright hit him or scream at him, and yet another part of him wishes she would. It's like when a mother says, I'm not angry, just disappointed, or when they give the silent treatment. It might not have been her intention, but her words only added to his already extreme guilt. He wasn't guilty over being angry with her or for acting desperately. He was guilty for costing a friendship, for using her to end his own suffering, not even thinking about how she'd feel, or his own family when they learned. I'm such an idiot. Aenor finally finished his inspections and his treatments. As he put away his gloves and stepped back, he walked to the living room where Mariel was beginning to stir. It was still dark as pitch outside, but the endless stars cast a lovely atmosphere over the window. Jennifer slid aside so he could sit, and did so smiling. Titania sat down with Philip, and Grognar soon followed, though he didn't take a seat. So what's the prognosis? Titania asked. For a rushed pat job, you did rather well, Aenor commented. There are no serious infections of the wounded areas, but those nashes are deep and will take time to heal. I can't say for certain when you'll be back to 100%. So you mean there's no hope? Grognar asked. Not at all, Philip chuckled. I've got a few brews that I can give him to get those cuts closed. As long as it doesn't move around much, he should be fit as a fiddle in just 3, maybe 4 days. 3 or 4 days? That's insane, Titania cried. That's really possible? He was near dead a week ago. Never doubt me, my lovely demon, Philip grinned. Are you flirting with me? Titania hissed darkly. I wouldn't. Seriously? Mariel giggled sleepily, sitting up finally. She's really not your type. Back to the topic at hand, Aenor snarled, seemingly disgusted by the current conversation. Even with Philip's concoctions, as a doctor, I can't in good conscience trust him to be at full fighting fitness. I understand that one of you is a bard. I am, Ariel waved. If you know any stamina or rejuvenation songs, that would be helpful. Even with that, though, there are other factors. The song and the concoctions will only last temporarily. The human body must naturally heal on its own. Plus, there's the fact that he's a half-breed. Humans heal faster than elves do, so I don't know which race he'll take after in that department. Anor explained. And even more than that, there were other things I noticed in my examination. The boy has scar tissue covering much of his body. I noticed that when I was patching him up, Titania remarked. Any thoughts on how he got them? Well, as an assassin, he'd likely have plenty of battle scars, but some of them are far too old for them to be just from his battles. Some look almost, perhaps only about 7 or 8 years old. Then that would mean, he was still only a child, Anor concluded. The boy was tortured. All eyes turned to the sleeping blemish, and a hush fell over them. Philip spat on the ground and sneered. The Inquisition? Probably. Fucking sons of... Are they a problem for him now? Titania asked, interrupting Philip's rant. No, the scars likely caused no damage to him physically. But that's not my concern. Physical trauma of this magnitude at a young age can have psychological effects on a child. How old did you suspect he was mentally? 8, most likely, Titania answered. I think he's like Grognar. He aged up during the Cataclysm. And if he was found and raised by the Inquisition and tortured by them, he's likely had little to no experience with familial bonds or compassion. I think the Inquisition was molding him into a perfect killer. How so? Mariel asked. Well, what holds anyone back from killing? Empathy, compassion, fellowship, fear, all of these things make a man hesitate. Imagine if you were never shown these things or taught them. Well, that hesitation ceases to exist. You kill without question and without thinking. You don't feel for your prey because you never had feelings done to you, Philip explained darkly. But then, wait, Ragnar spoke up. Titania said that when she saved him and then defended him from Hija, Blemish hugged her and broke down crying. Sounds to me like he understands some compassion. Understands it? No. But feel it? Possibly. It's very possible that he's not been fully indoctrinated, or at least he hasn't lost his capacity for empathetic and compassionate relationships. Anor replied. It takes time to make a man cold-blooded, although for some all it takes is a horn. If you have something to say to me, Doc, say it, Titania snared, her eyes flashing a familiar and dangerous red. I have a lot I'd say to you, but we're around civilized people. Of course, that must be new to someone like you. Titania started to rise to her feet, her fangs bared, when immediately Philip put a hand on Anor's shoulder with a warning. Dude, chill out, he hissed. Get some air or something. Seeing that Anor was being brought to heel, Titania sat back down, though her face was seething with anger. The bottom line is, Philip continued, we'll have Blemish ready to fight in 3 or 4 days. But whether he's mentally ready is another story, since he seems to have taken something of a liking to you, Gorgeous. Why, you son of a... Then I think it should be up to you to try and gauge his mental disposition. If he's ready to kill a high orc, you just let us know. Philip helped Anor out of his chair and was seated to lead him out. I'll leave some drops behind with instructions on how to administer them, but if we're going out here too long, the orcs will get suspicious. We should really go. Grognar, are you coming? Mariel and Jennifer both looked at Grognar and Titania. Titania looked at him too, but to Grognar's surprise, it wasn't one of anger, more of sadness. She seemed more remorseful. Grognar shared the expression before turning too. Yeah, I'm coming. We'll be back soon, he sighed. Until then, Titania answered with a shallow nod. Then the creaking sound of a door opened, and then the gentle thud of it closing sealed the cabin in still a quiet of awkward silence. Mariel coughed politely before Jennifer looked at her daughter. What is it, sweetheart? Just curious, but, do you think that Philip person should know that you were a guy before the Cataclysm? She giggled. Titania looked at her a moment and then burst out laughing. It was the first time laughter had been heard in her cabin in over a week. All right, and that is chapter 11. I hope those of you who listened to that enjoyed it, although I noticed that there was a lot of talking going on in the comments. So give me a second, I need to get something to drink. Yeah, I noticed it was a religious discussion that got out of hand, and I'm a little disappointed in you guys for that. All right, well, I think we need a break from New Epoch. All right. We'll do chapter 12 a little later. I'm going to pick something else. Let's see. Let's see. No, not that one. What about... Ah, this one could be interesting. All right, so what I'm going to read now is something a little interesting. I have a series that I've been working on. It's kind of an anthology series called the New Eden Chronicles. Basically, in this Chronicles, what I've created... How many of you guys in the chat have ever heard of the anime or manga, Everyday Life with Monster Girls? In this manga/anime, the setup is that in the world there are monster people, but they've been separated from humanity for a long time, and somehow, some way, humanity and the monster folk are now aware of each other, and they're trying to do an interspecies exchange program to help them integrate into human society, which is a cool idea. But I always ask myself, okay, where were they this whole time? Where were they actually at? This doesn't seem logistically possible. How could we go into the modern day and not know that these things were around? So I came up with my own story. In this story, basically the idea is that at some point in the Bermuda Triangle, we discovered or opened a portal into another world called Eden. And you can take whatever religious connection you want from that. But in Eden, there are no humans. There are only monsters, like monsters, fantasy races, stuff like that. And basically what happened is everyone was getting ready for a big war. We thought it was going to be a big war between the modern technological humans of our world versus the fantasy races of Eden. But that's not what happened. What ended up happening is the two races actually started to work, commingle, and now humans are able to cross into Eden, and the other races are able to cross into our world and kind of intermingle. And so these stories are basically stories of different instances of these other races interacting with humans. So I thought that this would be a pretty cool thing to do. Raven and everyone have a good reading. I'll be leaving this chat as my opposing views stir up drama here. Cat Drim, you don't have to do that. You don't have to leave. But you don't need to stir the pot, is all I'm saying. There's a time and a place, bro. The Bible when we're talking about the Bible, when we're talking about spreading our Christian views, Paul says very clearly how we're supposed to do it. We don't do it to antagonize or to hurt or to harass. We do it from a point of love and peace. If we're causing problems, then we stop and we let things settle. There are times and places for how we approach these things. So let's just cool down. No one's mad at anyone. Things got out of hand. Okay? We're cool. There's nothing to be concerned about. There's nothing to be ashamed of. All right. Let's keep going. All right, here we go. This one is the first one I've written in the New Eden series. It's called Lamia Love. Whoa, hold on. There was a rumble outside. Oh, someone's starting their motorcycle. Okay, we're good. All right, here we go. Lamia Love. Y'all may like this one. It's a little longer, but it's pretty good. I wrote this on May 6th, 2023. So this was written just last year. Here we go. James walked through the city, hands stuffed in his pockets and his head down, eyes focused dead ahead towards the diner on the end of the street. It was late. In fact, it was close to midnight. James knew that he should probably be in bed in his apartment, but he couldn't. He didn't want to sleep right now. He needed some relief. He stepped into the diner and glanced at the sign on the door, "All races welcome." He smirked to himself at the sign. That sign wouldn't have been necessary 5 years ago, back when everything was normal before the conjunction. 5 years ago, mankind discovered a mirror world hidden behind a veil somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. This dimension was not home to humans, but rather to creatures like something out of a fairy tale or RPG. Elves, dwarves, lizard folk, centaurs, minotaurs, harpies, and on and on and on. At first, there had been conflict, but the various governments around the world found that perhaps diplomacy would serve things better. Thus, the Conjunction Initiative began, a concerted effort to open our world to theirs for mutual exchange and education. Now these other races could get jobs, lives, and families in this world just as humans could do so in theirs. The conjunction wasn't entirely appreciated by everyone, though. There were elements around the United States who rose up against it, fearing that these monsters, as they were often degraded to be called, were a threat to the nation and the world at large. And the non-humans from this realm were more correctly referred to as Edenites, as they referred to their world as Eden, which opened the way to a lot of theological questions that James really didn't care to dive into. The Edenites were just as distrusting to humanity as humans were to them, and mutual exchange was taking time. Only a handful of shops and stores had actively worked to accommodate these new creatures, and this diner apparently was one of them. James looked around to see if anyone was here. At first, he saw only humans sitting at tables, eating and conversing, but careful inspection revealed a few key features that revealed the truth. 3 men were at a booth talking in hushed whispers. All had long hair and fair features, looking just a little too attractive. Their hair likely hid pointed ears. Elves. And sitting at the bar, with his back to the door, was a man whose feet didn't reach the floor, but his hair was so thick and shaggy, James could hardly imagine the beard that he couldn't see. A dwarf. Everyone else looked human enough. James shrugged, and a hostess led James to a private booth. He sat down and picked up the menu to glance at the food. James wasn't all that hungry, but he needed to take his mind off the day. Everything had gone so smooth. He'd been all set for promotion at work. He'd done everything he was supposed to, and he was so excited to get that pay raise he wanted. But then Becky had to go and ruin it all. James worked in an accounting office, and there was an opening to move up to the executive board. James had met all the requirements to move up, and he'd been excited, but his colleague Becky decided to start spreading rumors. And the big one being that James was a supposed racist. It wasn't true, of course. James didn't hate any race, but he had been active on Twitter back in college. When the initial conflict between Edenites and humanity kicked off and war was on the horizon, James had made a few offhanded comments about the semi-human mongrels and how he wouldn't mind kicking their, quote, degenerate monster asses back to the isekai book they crawled out of. He certainly hadn't been alone in those sentiments. It was a different time, and everyone was afraid that a war was about to happen. And James was a patriot, his father being a Marine and all. But Becky had pulled up those old tweets to shame James and to make him look bad to the board. And now the board was going to vote in 3 days on the new executive board member, and James knew his prospects were grim. He stared at the menu, barely thinking about the food. Maybe it'd be better to just get a few drinks and go home. Just as he was about to set down his menu, movement appeared out of the corner of his eye. A figure was moving fast towards him, and he looked up to see a woman standing in front of him, but she wasn't a normal woman. Her hair was long and silky black, and she had a lightly tanned skin tone giving off almost Middle Eastern complexion. She had beautiful golden yellow eyes with serpent slits for pupils. Her body looked curvaceous and sexy, but it was hidden by a thick blue and black hoodie that she was wearing over it. But below her waist were not a pair of human legs, but a long and large snake tail with black scales that reflected the light from the ceiling in lovely waves. Her tail was coiling itself under her so it took up less space in the restaurant aisle. She was a Lamia, a snake woman. She didn't look older than 30, if that. Her hands were fidgeting and her eyes bore into his nervously. She wasn't dressed like a waitress, so who was she? "Excuse me," she asked quickly, her voice slightly accented. Could I sit across from you?" James blinked in surprise. A part of him told him to deny her, to wait for the hostess to sit her, but instead he found himself nodding, and she swiftly slithered into the seat, resting her tail against the booth and coiling the rest of her tail under the table. She grabbed the menu from James and began staring at it intently, though she didn't seem interested in ordering anything. It was as if she was hiding behind it. Who are you?" James asked. Crystal," she whispered, not looking up. There was a tinge to her voice that sounded something like fear. Why did you want to sit with... There she is! James looked up to see 3 men walking in. One was plump with hairy knuckles and a small beard on his face with brown eyes and sandy hair. The one next to him was a black man, dreadlocked hair, and half of his face had tattoos that marked him as someone tough and unbothered. The third one was also black, but a little shorter than the last one. One of his eyes was slightly lazy, as if drifting off focus, but that didn't distract from how intimidating he was portraying himself. "Thought you could run, huh, bitch?" Crystal slunk further into the booth, as if wanting to break through the restaurant wall and flee. "Just go away," she whimpered. "I don't want any trouble." "Well, you got trouble," the lazy-eyed one snarled, walking toward to grab her. "Hey!" I snapped, surprising by my own outburst. I was starting to rise to my feet on shaking knees. What on earth was I doing? I was no fighter? I knew I wouldn't stand a chance against these three. I wouldn't stand a chance against just one of them. But I couldn't let this go on. It was wrong, disgusting. I didn't know what their problem was with Crystal, but seeing how scared she was, I couldn't ignore it either. Leave the girl alone." "What, she your girlfriend?" the white one asked. What if she is?" I challenged dangerously. Crystal looked at me in disbelief, and even I was struggling to realize what I was saying. The lazy-eyed one didn't take his hands off Crystal's arm, but his eyes, or rather his good one, was trained on me. "You got a slut for a girlfriend," the taller black one snapped. "Skank was practically throwing herself on us, then bolted out the blue after taking our money." "That's not true," Crystal cried. "You shoved money in my face and I tried to—" "You're a lying snake," the white one snapped. "Who the hell gives a damn what you say?" "I do!" "Lay off!" James barked. Finally, Lazy Eye let go of her, and now they were moving towards James. He stuck out his chin and tried to look tough, raising his fist, ready to fight and die for this cause that he knew nothing about. At least it was better than laying down and taking it. "Gentlemen!" There was a voice from behind, and all five turned to see a tall man with black hair standing there. He had on the chef's white double-breasted shirt, close-cut black hair, and shaved face. He looked in his 50s and had a cold, unyielding glare to his eyes. "I'll have to ask you three men who just came in to leave." "You got a problem with customers, old man?" Lazy Eye challenged. His buddy put a hand on his shoulder to get his attention. He was looking around the diner, and James followed his gaze. The elves and dwarf from earlier were all on their feet, glaring daggers at the three men, and a few human patrons were rising as well. They were now outnumbered, and they knew it. "If you don't leave immediately, I'll have to call the police," the manager said forcefully. "Whatever. Place sucks anyway." "Got a real vermin problem," the tall black one snarled, and he and his buddies skulked off, leaving the restaurant. The manager then turned to James and Crystal with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that, you two. Would you two care for a free appetizer for your trouble?" Crystal said nothing, but James nodded. Yeah, cheese sticks, please." The manager walked away, and James found Crystal's yellow eyes looking at him with a look of wonder. "Why did you say that? Why did you stick up for me?" "Well, why did you sit in my booth?" James asked back. Crystal looked away and placed her hands on the table. "I thought maybe if I looked like I was here with someone, they'd leave me alone," she suggested. "Well, I volunteered as your boyfriend to see if it would take their mind off you," James answered. She fluffed and looked away. "I am so sorry about that," she whispered. "What was that about, anyway?" James asked weakly, still recovering from the shock of it all. Crystal brushed long strands of black hair out of her face and then sighed. "I moved to the human world 4 months ago," she explained. "I wanted to be a dancer or go on Broadway or something big, like a performer." She blushed deeply. I really like movies, and I kind of want to be a star, too." "Okay, that's a fair aspiration," James said. "But it isn't easy. Apparently you need to start small to get noticed, right? So I was looking online and found a job for a dancer, but I didn't read the fine print, I guess. It turns out the job was at a exotic strip club." "Well, you didn't stay, did you?" "No, once I knew what it was, I left, but those three guys saw me leaving out the back entrance, and they thought I was one of the girls who danced. They started asking me for some fun and pushed a bunch of cash at me. I kept telling them to leave me alone, and finally I managed to slither away," she explained. James listened intently, frowning. "So, what, you came here?" "It's a diner. I thought there would be people here who could help me," she replied. "Well, okay, you were right." As James spoke, a basket of cheese sticks was brought to them and sat at the table. James stared at them passively, but Crystal's eyes seemed to light up. "Well, go ahead. I'm not that hungry." Crystal wasted no time snaring two in her fingers and munching them happily. Cheese dangled from her lips, and James giggled at how cute she was looking at eating that way. "You act half starved." "It's been a few days since I ate," she admitted. James' smile faded. "Wait, a few days? What?" "Oh, it's no big deal," she said matter-of-factly. "It may seem strange to humans, but Lamia, like me, can live on only one meal a week, so long as the meal is large and rich in nutrients and carbohydrates." Oh, how is that possible? I asked as she bit down another cheese stick. Okay, so humans, like, you're warm-blooded, so you can maintain your body temperature internally. That means you can be more active, but it also means you burn more energy than reptiles. Lamia are cold-blooded, so we use external heat and light to give us energy. That means we don't require nearly as much food as you do to function. So long as I eat well once a week and get all the proper nutrients, I can go for a while without eating. She said all this with such bravado and smoothness that James wondered if she hadn't rehearsed this explanation before. Well, that's definitely unique. Funny, I thought you might say repulsive, Crystal rumbled. That's what a lot of people think. It's been hard to get part-time jobs since coming here. Everyone thinks I'm scary. James started to speak up when suddenly the waitress walked over. Her smile was a tad forced as she tried not to look directly at Crystal. Can I, take your order? Crystal went, I'm fine. I thought you said you were. I don't have any money. I didn't take what those jerks gave me, and I dropped my purse while getting away, she explained. James looked at her sadly and then gave a smile. I'll pay for it, he offered. No, you can't do that. I can, and I will. Just order. Crystal's stomach growled loudly as she bit her lip before finally consenting and ordering. She ordered enough for 3 people. A quesadilla, a plate of spaghetti with extra meatballs, a pot roast over rice, all with sides of mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, dumplings. James doubted her ability to eat it all, but as the meal went on, he watched in amazement as she consumed it with relative ease, only stopping occasionally to sigh with content. Oh, won't you eat something? She asked as she wrapped up her pot roast and was now attacking the dumplings. I'm not very hungry, James said. I only came here to just get away and think. Crystal paused, eating to look at him. To come and think? What's wrong? She asked. It's nothing. Will you help me? She insisted. The least I can do is help you if I can. Well, that's a thing, James lamented. You can't. I mean, there's nothing you can do. Try me, she urged, swallowing her dumpling. James sighed and then began to tell her everything. About his job at the accountant office, about the promotion and his goals, about Becky and his rivalry with her, about his tweets from his younger days as well, and he fully expected her to bristle at that, but she didn't even flinch. Merely listened to everything being said. When James finished speaking, she sat down her fork and leaned on the table, her head in her hand. So, if I heard you correctly, you're worried that if the board thinks you're a racist, you'll be denied a promotion? She asked. Well, that's at the very least, James said sadly. Becky's already showed them the tweets, and honestly, I'm surprised you're not offended by them. Are you kidding? She laughed. The propaganda Eden threw around about humans was way worse than that. If anything, what you wrote was modest. I've been called worse since being here. Trust me, I'm not offended. James smiled, glad she wasn't upset. And besides, if you really felt that way about me and Edenites, you wouldn't have helped me. She went back to eating, and James contemplated her words. It was true. He had helped her, and James certainly didn't hate her. Those tweets had been the immature responses to an upcoming war, not a truly heartfelt hatred. When she finished eating, she set the plates aside, and James reached for his wallet to pay for it. Crystal watched him a moment and then gave a soft smile. I'm sorry, what was your name again? She asked. James laughed, realizing that in all the excitement, he hadn't even introduced himself. Sorry, I'm James, he answered. James, I'd like to help you, she said. How? James asked. She grinned wider. I'd like to be your girlfriend. This was not the answer James had expected, and he found himself dropping the pen he'd been about to sign the check with. He looked at her in shock, and her smile never once faded. You're joking. I'm not. I promise you. All you have to do is prove you're not a racist to the company. And if we're dating, it'd be pretty hard to say you're a racist now, wouldn't it? James shook his head. No, that's not going to be enough, James sighed. They'll just argue I'm paying you to play a role or something. Crystal's smile softened somewhat, and she looked down at the table as dirty plates were removed. You don't know much about Lamia, do you? She asked. James didn't answer before she continued. Look, even among Edenites, we're not very liked because of our snake qualities. We're seen as dangerous, even evil by some. We are discriminated against probably more than some other Edenites who have more human qualities. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, James tried to reason. But that's exactly why this will work for you, Crystal continued, ignoring James. I'm going to show up at work tomorrow to bring you lunch. You'll what? I'll let everyone know I'm your girlfriend, and they'll be terrified by me. They'll be disgusted because, look at me, Crystal paused, but they'll feel guilty for it. The more they subconsciously feel afraid of me, the more they'll overcompensate to appear unbiased or tolerant. Humans always overcompensate to hide their faults. They'll definitely ignore your past tweets just to keep from exposing how scared they are of me. No, we aren't afraid of this scary snake lady. We like her. In fact, we like her so much, let's promote her boyfriend. The idea was so silly that James burst out laughing and stood up from the booth. Crystal, have a safe trip home, James answered curtly, walking. Wait! She jumped up and slithered after him, following James out of the restaurant. When James reached the parking lot, she slithered around to face him, stopping him. I'm trying to help you here, James. I don't want that help, James snapped, looking away from her. You want to just manipulate my employers for my benefit. Sorry, but isn't that what Becky did to you? But at your own expense, James shouted. You want to portray yourself as a monster and a freak just to guilt my bosses into giving me the promotion? I mean, even if it works, that's degrading. I won't let you do that. Crystal's eyes widened and she lowered herself slightly, deflated. That's what you think this is? She asked. Well, what else is it? You're making yourself into a spectacle to help me. If that's what it takes to get the promotion, then I don't want it. You're not just an Edenite or a Lamia. You're a woman, and I don't want any woman to flaunt herself for my benefit, James argued. Crystal looked down at the ground and then nodded her head. You really are a kind person, James, she said softly. You really care that much about me. She then reached out and took James's hand, lifting it slightly and smiling. But James, this is what I want to do. It's not flaunting my monster qualities. It's doing something kind for my boyfriend, just like what you did for me. Well, you'll be stared at. You'll be ridiculed. Newsflash, I already am. It may not even work. Maybe not, Crystal shrugged, but it can't hurt. It would hurt you. James, I'm a big girl. I'm not going to break down that easily, she urged. Look, James, the worst thing you could do here is sabotage yourself by not letting me at least try. James stared at her for a long moment and then sighed. I feel like I'm going to regret this. The next day, James was sitting at his desk, reading through a few files on his computer, when suddenly his phone rang from the front desk. He answered and heard a rather shaking voice on the other end. James, you have a visitor? Well, send them up, James answered, hiding his smile. She'd come after all. It took 5 minutes for Crystal to make her way up from the elevator to the third floor. James looked up to watch her slither towards him. She was carrying a bag in one hand, and she was wearing a white blouse with a red sweater over it, opening to reveal her blouse. Her makeup was done. She had on a skirt that hung down slightly that swished as she moved along the office aisle. Every person in the office was staring, almost open-mouthed at her, and James had to stifle a snicker as she weaved around onlookers with grace. She reached his desk and set the bag down beside him. I brought lunch, James. I made it myself. Did you make enough for both of us? James asked, and she winked. I think I ate enough last night for a while. I'd like you to eat for a change. James' eyes drifted from her to the woman standing by the water dispenser, her eyes wide as dinner plates, her patchy blonde hair draped in her face, and her pointed nose looking like just a little too long for her face. She was a rather skinny woman, but not very appealing, taking on an almost rodent-like quality. Becky clearly was not expecting to see this, and that was almost reward enough. He couldn't resist digging at it a little either. Hey, Becky, you're wasting the water, he called. Becky squeaked as she realized she was pushing the water switch too long and let it go. Crystal looked up at her and grinned at the mousy-haired woman. Okay, she's the one giving you trouble, she whispered, and they call me unappealing. James couldn't hold back the snorting laughter at that and scooted his chair aside to make room for Crystal to join him. As she adjusted her long body, another figure entered the room. His name was Mr. Jenkins. He was on the board and was also Becky and James's boss. Now what is all this commotion? What's going on? He froze at the sight of Crystal, but quickly tried to force himself to behave naturally. Oh, I'm sorry. I see you have a visitor today, James? Yes, this is Crystal. She's my girlfriend. Crystal rose herself up from her seat to go to Mr. Jenkins. She held out her hand, and it was all he could do not to maintain a smile as he took it and shook. You must be James's boss. It's a pleasure to meet you. Likewise. James speaks very highly of you, she added. I know he loves working here, and I'm so glad he has such good people to work with. James smiled, watching her play a very convincing role, and yet he wondered how much of it was an act and how much of it was genuine. She probably didn't know all that much about his work or who he worked with, but Crystal clearly cared a great deal about James and was willing to play this game for him. Well, I'm glad to see James has such a beautiful girlfriend who supports him here. Oh, I definitely want him to see him succeed, she agreed. I hope it doesn't bother you that he's dating an Edenite. No, Jenkins answered a little too quickly. No, not at all. It's fantastic. We don't have any issues with that at all. Well, I'm so glad to hear it, Crystal beamed before slithering back to James's side and smiling. He means a lot to me. And that, James knew, was very genuine. There we go. That was the story. Actually, it was a much more popular story than I expected it to be. But that was the first chapter in my Edenite Chronicles. Now we have enough time for probably one more story. So I can probably read one more Edenite story to you guys, or we can do one more new Epoch. Whichever y'all want to do. I'm good either way. Seems people are talking about Warden and Obushi for some reason. Well, anyway, y'all talk amongst yourselves while I refill my drink real quick. Okay, got a vote for Edenite. Another vote for Epoch. More Edenite, more Eden. Wow, okay, we got a lot of votes for Edenite. Okay. All right, sure. Another one for Eden. Okay. Let's do another one. Let's do, I know which one to do. I know exactly which one to do. Now, guys, this one will be interesting. This is a two-part Edenite story. This one is called The Queen of Bees. This one will be fun. I like this one. This one was written May 20th, 2023. All right. Here we go. Ready? Tell you what, I'll be nice and I'll read both stories to you, but then after that I do need to go. All right. In the world of Eden, the Edenites live under 7 different monarchs that ruled over different provinces and territories. One of these provinces, more discreet than the others, was the land of Melphera, also known as the Golden Kingdom, or the Land of Honey. Melphera is the home of the race known as the Apissara, a race of insect humanoids that bear close resemblance in relation to honeybees. Their society works very similar to that of real-world bees, and it is the initiative of human society beyond Eden to study and understand them better. All 7 Edenite monarchs were invited to visit the human world and tour its countries and lands, but only 4 agreed to go. The other 3 refused for reasons of their own. However, Queen Melody Theodorax IV, the reigning Apissara monarch, had extended a counteroffer that a single diplomat or ambassador may be allowed admittance to her queendom in the spring. This was agreed to, and now on the second day of springtime for Eden, a young man in his early 30s is making his way into the Golden Kingdom. As he passes through the dark woods, he spies the glints of honey gold ahead of him through the peaks in the tree line, and he hears a distinct humming sound coming from the city. As he passed the forest line, he saw it. The great golden walls of Melphera. To say it was massive was an understatement. The great walls stood almost 20 meters tall, and they were golden brown. They appeared sturdy, but the structure did not appear to be stone or concrete. Beyond the walls, the ambassador could see large dome-like structures rising all about, all golden or yellow in various shades. Some stood so high that even their entrances could be seen over the walls, while others were so small that only the tips of these buildings were visible. But all about, he saw the denizens of this land. They flew about the air, passing each other in midair as if cars on a busy highway, and though he couldn't make out all their features well, he could see the resemblance to bees. As he got closer to the front gates, 2 Apissara soldiers suddenly flew from the wall and down to the earth, spears in hand. He jumped back as he took them in. They were as tall as he was, golden yellow in color with black markings that contrasted them. The markings were slightly different on each, and he wondered if perhaps black markings on Apissara were like fingerprints on human. No marking is quite the same. Both had feminine proportions, so he assumed them to be women. He was no insect expert, but he'd heard somewhere that most bees of a hive were female, so he assumed this was the case here. They wore armor over their chests and helmets that only revealed their round, ovular eyes and their lower mouth, which looked relatively normal save for a single line running from the lower lip to the chin, which he wasn't sure was the function of. They had large abdomens that jutted out from their rears, and on the tips were the small 9-inch long dart-like stingers that he knew were likely fatal. The women had 4 arms and 2 legs, all of which were black in color and segmented like an insect's legs. Through the hands and feet, while clawed, were certainly equipped with 3 fingers apiece. State your business, the first warrior snapped. The voice was female, so the ambassador breathed a sigh of relief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an ID he'd been given by the United Nations. I am Ambassador Jake Gresset. I'm here to meet with Queen Melody Theodorax for a diplomatic conference. She scheduled our meeting today. The soldiers eyed each other, and then one closed her eyes and began twitching the antennae she had sprouted from her head. After a few moments, she nodded. Very sorry. Had to verify. The Queen is expecting you. They lowered their spears and walked back to the gate, pushing it open for Jake. He smiled and nodded to them both. Thank you very much. The two women nodded to him, and he walked into the city. I'm sorry, but, what is it? The soldier to his left asked. I'm afraid I don't know the way to the palace, Jake admitted sheepishly. Could one of you ladies... Not our job, the other one said curtly. She pointed to the road leading forward. Follow the main road. You'll see signs showing the way. It's the largest structure in the city. You can't miss it. She nodded quickly. Thank you very much, he smiled and then hurried away to the city. It was like walking through a city made of honeycomb and golden stone. The streets were paved in gold and a waxy substance that made it soft yet firm enough to walk on. Every city building was dome-shaped, and Jake noticed that despite the diversity in height and size, they all seemed to bear one of a handful of functions. Some looked primarily meant for food or its creation. Some were training grounds where he could see soldiers like the one he'd met running through drills and combat training, and then some seemed to be living quarters like apartments. The doors on the bottom were seldom used, as many citizens just flew to a window and crawled in. Jake was so caught up staring and watching, he nearly bumped into a woman carrying a large box. Oh, I beg your pardon, he cried. She looked up at him in surprise. Unlike the soldiers up front, she wore a jumpsuit of some kind, marked with black lining over a white overall color. She picked up her box again. Who are you? Ambassador Jake Gresset, he answered. She smiled. Oh, yes, the human. She nodded and continued walking, and Jake turned after her. Miss? She paused a moment to look back, her long black hair bouncing as she did. I'm sorry, is this the right way to the palace? Yes, she answered, and then turned her back to her work. Jake frowned a little. She was just as curt as the soldiers had been. Were these people being rude to him because he was human? He was starting to feel uneasy. It suddenly hit him that none of the Apisarans he'd passed seemed to notice or care that he was there. Despite this being their first time seeing a human, they didn't seem to care about him. It was as if they had no other concern outside of whatever it was they were doing. After a very long walk, he finally reached the largest structure there was, a great golden palace that seemed to drip with austerity. The doors to it were large and incredible, and there were various windows and doors on the walls that Apisara flew in and out of like it was some large airport. Going to the door, he pushed it open and strolled inside. In the main hall, Apisara bustled about, carrying boxes like the ones he'd seen earlier, and also bundles of cloth. He looked and noticed a few scaling the walls of the interior, rubbing wax-like material on blemishes in its surface. He moved silently through the crowd, wondering how he was going to find the queen in all this, when suddenly a segmented hand grabbed his arm. He spun to see another female Apisara standing beside him. Her black hair with silver strands and weary face were clear. She wore a toga of some sort that showed she was a little plump, but still feminine. Are you by any chance Ambassador Gresset? I am, he answered. I am Priscilla. I'm Queen Melody's attendant. She is waiting for you in the throne room. Walk with me. Satisfied that he now had someone to tail, he followed after the bobbing abdomen of Priscilla. She said little and turned him through various hallways and doors until she finally stopped at a large black door with golden embroidery along the edges. Without preamble, Priscilla pushed open the door and bowed. There, Jake got his first look at the queen. She sat on a large cushioned throne, her abdomen far larger than any other Apisara he'd seen. Her body was matronly, having a mature look, making him realize that all the other citizens he'd seen so far seemed somehow youthful or younger in comparison. Not that she looked elderly. Her body was curvaceous and tight, with large and prominent breasts that she had hidden behind a white gown, with golden etching engravings and embroidery in the fabric. Atop her head she wore a crown, adorning her long, honey-colored hair that was tied back behind her. Her large ovular eyes turned to notice him, and her head lifted slightly, revealing a fur-like collar around her neck that looked somehow regal. Her wings fluttered a bit, and she rose to her feet, standing almost a head taller than any other Apisara. She approached and smiled politely. Greetings, Ambassador. I am Queen Melody Theodorax IV, the sovereign queen of Melfera. Her voice was smooth and soft, yet mature. She carried an air to her that felt almost motherly. Jake bowed politely. Your Majesty, I am Jake Gresset. It's an honor to finally meet you. The honor is mine, truly, she smiled. I have been most excited for your visit, Ambassador. But did you alone come? I expected an entourage. No, Your Highness, Jake admitted. The United Nations felt it would be unwise to send too large a group to a land unaccustomed to humans. It might make you nervous. The Queen chuckled. I say your caution is admirable but highly unnecessary. My children wouldn't have cared in the least. I thought back to how the Apisara had almost ignored me or just been short or curt with me, as if reading my thoughts. Her antenna wiggled gently and she bowed her head slightly. You see, my children are sadly not quite as abstract thinkers as you or I. The majority are born with jobs to do, and performing them is their only concern. Strangers are little more than an afterthought. Had you been a threat, however, every one of them would have taken notice, I assure you. You refer to them as your children, Jake noted curiously. Is that literal or metaphorical? Literal, actually, the Queen giggled. Indeed, it may seem strange to humans like yourself, but Apisara queens are the sole progenitors of our kind. When a queen comes of age, she begins mating immediately with her drones so that she can begin producing offspring. All of the citizens of this kingdom are my children, with only a few exceptions, who were born before I became queen. They are therefore my siblings, as they are children of my late mother, the former Queen of Malfera. Jake's eyes widened. He had assumed, but it still felt impossible that this woman could possibly be the birth mother of an entire nation. How is that possible? Jake asked. I mean, no disrespect. It's quite all right, she interrupted. There's much to discuss and do. I shall give you a tour of the palace. Then I have prepared a feast for your arrival, after which a room has been prepared for you to stay. How long will you be with us? Jake blinked several times at all she'd said. I hadn't planned on long, perhaps a night. There's no need to be so reserved, Mr. Gresset. You're welcome here as long as you like. She then turned and waved towards her throne. Shall I show you around? Please, Jake said anxiously, tailing after the Queen. She walked to her throne and touched the arm of it, smiling pleasantly. My throne is not just the seat of my power, it's also where I lay my eggs. She pointed to the floor around the feet of the throne, which Jake noticed was covered in cushions. Around 3 times a week, I will begin laying eggs here, usually around a few dozen or so a week, and the nursing caste will be there with me to immediately take the eggs to the appropriate nursery facility. Nursery caste? In Apisara society, the Queen explained, the people are divided into different social groups. The nursing caste who tend to the offspring I produce and help to raise them. The worker caste who construct and repair the city and its defenses. The foraging caste who gather and prepare food and supplies beyond our walls. The soldier caste who protect the city from enemies and go to war when needed. And finally, the drone caste, who are the males who serve as my partners for reproduction. So, all of the males are drones? Indeed. I understand in the human world males and females are of similar numbers to each other, but in Apisara society, males make up about a 25th of the population. They are exceedingly rare, and thus all males are part of the drone caste, so that I will never be without someone to mate with. Jake shuddered at the thought of only living to be a sex slave to the Queen, but shook that worry aside. The Queen giggled again, as if reading his mind. She then clapped her hands together, and from out of a nearby curtained door frame, a figure appeared. It was an Apisara, but he was built more broadly, his body more toned and built than the others. He had a large abdomen, but not like the Queen's, and his hair was black and short. He was shirtless, exposing his body. He dropped to one knee and bowed. Your Highness. This, Ambassador, is one of my drones, Darren. Do not assume he's merely a slave to me. The drones are born for the purpose of pleasing their queen and helping her to reproduce for the queendom. Jake looked at Darren and then to the Queen. So, only the Queen can mate? Jake asked. Oh, heavens no, the Queen laughed. Any of my daughters can mate with a drone if they wish, but most don't. For one thing, they can't reproduce offspring. Only I can do that. And secondly, as I said, most of my daughters aren't very abstract thinkers, concerning themselves only with day-to-day work and toil. Most don't have the time or drive to think about sexual things. She turned to Darren. You may go, Darren. I shall call on you another night. Yes, Your Highness. And the drone turned and sprinted back through the curtain. Jake watched him go and then looked at the Queen. Okay, so you mate with drones and lay their eggs, and those eggs are taken to a nursery facility? Different facilities around the city will raise the children to the needs required. For example, if the Queendom is at war, I shall lay more eggs to fill the soldier caste, and thus the babies will be taken to that facility for the proper training and upbringing. If the city is going through a famine or a disaster, I will lay more eggs for the foraging caste. Do you control which caste type you'll lay? Not quite, the Queen shrugged. Mostly I just produce the eggs. The nursery caste keeps track of where work is needed and where we're low on a certain caste.
They will then take the babies to the necessary location and feed them and raise them to be part of that caste.
The queen started to walk down a hallway behind the throne as Jake followed.
This hall leads to an exit where the nursing caste goes in and out carrying the eggs I lay. The path will fork and lead to various facilities.
Jake listened to her talk, picturing all of this and feeling somewhat horrified. It felt like some kind of communist utopia, a world where people were born and raised to do one thing their whole lives, with only the queen and her attendants having any real autonomy.
The queen frowned and looked at him. Mr. Gresset, what is communism? She asked.
Jake winced at the question. What?
Your mind. I can read some of your surface-level thoughts, she answered.
I didn't know you could do that, Jake muttered, blushing. I'm so sorry.
It's quite all right, the queen explained. Our antennae can pick up subtle vibrations and pheromones in each other. Only I can actually interpret these as thoughts, though. Again, only on the surface level.
Well, to answer your question, communism is a form of government from our world. It feels similar to what your society is like. A strong dictator at the head of a government. All that is produced is shared among the society, and people are born with roles to play, unable to dream or pursue goals beyond the demands of the government.
The society of Apisara cannot work with any other race I know of, Queen Melody explained. Apisara, by their nature, are single-minded creatures. They do not dream or aspire beyond their role. When an Apisara is born, they are fed the nectar of their facility, and then their only job from then on is to support the city as best as they can according to their role. But this way of life cannot work for a race with more than a single-minded thinking and aspiration. Humans, elves, dwarves, lizardmen, and so on. They all are not simple-minded. They all function and feel and think individually from their society. But my children live to support me, live to protect my country, and so that is all they desire. To your people, I suppose it is something abhorrent to consider, but for our race, it's all we know. I pray you not judge us harshly for this.
Jake turned quickly, holding up his hands. No, that wasn't my intention. I'm sorry. I really wasn't trying to insult you.
I know this, the queen smiled. You seem like a polite person. You, of course, have your personal issues, and I do not blame you for them. That is why I wanted you to see for yourself my queendom, to understand why our cultures and our ways are so different.
So that's why you declined the invitation of the 7 monarchs?
Well, that was one of the reasons, she admitted. But the other reason is that I can't be too far from my kingdom. Like I said, I lay eggs 3 to 4 times a week. It wouldn't do to spend a month or so touring your world when I needed to lay eggs.
True, but, couldn't you take a few weeks off? Jake asked. The queen chuckled at that.
I'm afraid not. You see, Apisara lives are short. Usually only about 2 decades or so in length. Queens live much longer, usually around 90 to 100 years, but the average life of an Apisara is relatively small. An egg I lay will hatch a little less than a month after I lay it. The child will become independent of the nursing caste after 2 years, and then they will begin training for their roles, a process that usually only takes a year. After that, they are fully fledged citizens of Malfera. Each year, a fair percentage of my citizens pass away, and thus new subjects must fill their place. That's not even taking into consideration wars with our neighbors or rival kingdoms. You can't imagine the losses that brings us.
Have there been many?
More than I'd like, she sighed. And that is why I don't want conflict between humanity and the Apisara. I am open to trade and working with humanity, and in time I will discuss these matters with you. But for now, let us continue our tour.
The queen led Jake away and through the palace. As Jake followed, he took in her facial expressions and was surprised by the stoicism there. As an ambassador, he'd met many Edenite peoples and cultures, but none of them quite compared to the Apisara or their queen. Perhaps he would take her up on a few extra days here. There was so much he wanted to see.
I'm glad to hear that, she smiled.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that thought meant only for yourself? She winked. I can be so nosy sometimes.
And that was part 1 of The Queen of Bees. Now, technically, we have run out of time, but if you guys enjoyed that, I will read you part 2, because this is a 2-part story. So, I'm going to take a quick drink. Y'all tell me if you think I should read the second part. Oh, I don't mind whether I stop or not. I'm asking you guys. Because technically, I usually sign off at 10:30, but it's good with me either way. I've got more, yes. If you're tired, I'm not tired, I'm good. All right, well, looks like everyone wants me to do it. So we'll do it. All right, last part. Here we go. Part 2. I wrote this May 24th, 2023. Jake stirred from his sleep and inhaled a sweet scent that set his mouth watering. He was reminded of when he was a child and his mother would make biscuits in the morning with honey, and it was always filled him with joy and excitement. As he opened his eyes, though, he was not in his childhood home, nor was he in his house. He was in a large room with golden walls and silk sheets. He sat up and looked around, the memories coming back to him. He glanced out the window to the sight he'd seen yesterday, the queendom of Malfera, the nation of bee people. The land of Eden was ruled by 7 different monarchies, and Malfera was one of them. When mankind had discovered this world across the rift into missions, war with the non-human races of Eden was just narrowly avoided. In an attempt to foster peaceful relations and potential cooperation, the 7 rulers were invited to visit and tour the human world. However, only 4 had agreed. The Queen of Malfera, Queen Melody Theodorax, had declined, citing her need to remain with her people. However, as a compromise, she had invited an ambassador to come and visit her land instead. That was why Jake was here. He was the delegate sent to visit the land. Yesterday, he met the Queen and learned a great deal about her and her world. She was the single progenitor of the Apisara, the bee race. All of her children were divided into castes and social groups that dictated how they would live and contribute to the nation, and none questioned their place or truly thought beyond their role. Only the Queen seemed to have any autonomy beyond her station, hence why she had invited Jake to remain in her palace for a longer duration. After a hearty and very sweet feast, he had been shown to his bedroom and had fallen asleep rather quickly. As he stood up, the door to his chamber suddenly opened, and 3 female Apisara attendants walked in, followed by a male drone. The females were wearing toga-like attire, and they bowed to him. The drone was shirtless, and wore only a cloth around his waist, and he too bowed.
"Good morning, sir," the front woman said. "The Queen hopes you have slept well. Food is prepared for you in the dining hall, and the Queen asks that you eat your fill."
Thank you, but will the Queen not be joining me?" Jake asked.
"Currently," she answered, "our Queen is preparing for another birthing cycle. She will be indisposed for the remainder of the morning. Once she has laid her eggs for the day, she will meet with you. In the meantime, I've been asked to answer your questions and give you a tour of the palace. My name is Emma."
Jake felt a slight pang of disappointment. After learning that the Queen was the only one who could lay eggs, he'd wanted to know more about that. Maybe even see the process. But then he shook his head. The more he thought about it, the more he thought that would be disgusting. It would be no different than watching a woman go into labor. Right, of course. Pleasure to meet you. And who are...
"Oh, these are Cilia and Tara, and the drone is Rock. We are the ones assigned to you for now," Emma explained.
Well, I don't need servants, Jake answered curtly.
"Be that as it may, it was our order from the Queen. Therefore, it is our pleasure," Emma urged.
Jake bit his lip, remembering how single-minded the Apisara were. They didn't question anything and simply took every order and directive literally and without question. Very well, I'll lead the way. The meal was, like the previous night, delicious and sweet. Jake began to suspect that perhaps they sweetened their food with honey. He didn't ask, though. He wanted to wait to meet with the Queen and ask her. Emma was an excellent guide, though. She walked Jake all around the palace, explaining each room's purpose and job. She led him to a cleaning area, where all the Apisara who work on the palace go to clean themselves. She also led him to the gardens, where workers constructed statues and tended to a beautiful fauna that looked opulent and regal in appearance. The smell of honey and nectar were intense everywhere he went, but particularly in the dining hall, and that only further confirmed his suspicion that honey was used in all their dishes. At one point, they passed the throne room doors, where he'd met the Queen previously.
"The Queen stays here. This is where she lays eggs and oversees our government,"
Emma explained as she passed it. Is she in there now? Jake asked.
"Yes," Emma answered. "She is laying another round of eggs for the nursery. Only nursery castes are allowed in at this time."
How long does the process take?
"It depends on the number of eggs, but it usually only takes 5 or 6 hours to complete a cycle," Emma answered flatly.
It's not painful for her, is it?
"I wouldn't know," Emma answered. "Now walk this way."
She walked on, leading Jake away from the throne room.
The tour continued beyond the castle walls, showing the architecture. Jake saw worker cats climbing all over the walls, fixing and repairing damage over time. Are there always structural problems? Jake asked. Not always, Emma answered. If there are none to fix, then the worker caste leaves the city to repair farms and foraging huts alongside the city walls. There's always something for them to fix or build. Jake watched them toil away and shrugged his shoulders. Following Emma onward, the rest of the morning proceeded rather uneventful until the near end of the tour. As Emma walked Jake down towards the city square to show him the center of commerce, suddenly out of nowhere she went rigid, her antenna on end. Jake blinked, noticing a reaction, only to see a similar reaction occurring in various other Apisara. It was as if all of them were going stiff. Their eyes flashed a moment, and they spun in a haunting manner to face something to the south. Well, what's wrong? Jake started to ask, but then he saw the answer to his question. It was darting fast through the street, knocking over Apisara in its way. It was taller than any of them by a wide margin, covered in muscles and with a bald head. It had long tusks in its jaws, and a single large round eye on its face. It was charging through the city, bellowing madly. Jake let out a shout of worry when suddenly heard loud, angry buzzing, like thousands of angry hornets. He hit the ground in shock as nearly 20 soldiers flew out of nowhere and surrounded the huge Cyclops. Stand down or die, the nearest soldier roared. The Cyclops ignored her and threw out his hand, slamming the soldier in the head and sending her crashing into a wall near her. She hit the wall hard and slumped to the ground, dead. Jake couldn't tell if she was dead or not, but he didn't see her breathing, so he had to assume she was. But it was clear that this brute was powerful. The other soldiers didn't hesitate. Drawing spears fast, they darted at the Cyclops, engaging in battle that Jake felt both enthralled by, but also terrified by. The Cyclops was vicious and fast, slamming its boulder-like fist down on the attacking soldiers, crushing two and incapacitating another. But each time a soldier went down, another flew over to fill in its lost spot, as more and more soldiers were arriving in response to the threat. Within moments, the Cyclops was surrounded by furious and sneering Apisara, and finally he couldn't hold them back any longer as they impaled him from every direction. Black spears jutting out from his chest, stomach, and neck as the soldiers finally killed the monster. With the creature dead, the soldiers dispersed and flew back to their posts, as if nothing had happened. The corpse of the monster lay there, unmoving, bleeding from every spear injury, its eye closed and its mouth slack. What just happened? Sorry, but the Queen is ready to see you now, Emma interrupted, turning to Jake. She has completed her cycle and has requested your presence. The throne room looked like he'd remembered. Jake walked along the long carpet leading to the throne where Queen Theodorax was reclining. She looked a bit tired, but still smiled warmly upon seeing him. He bowed formally, but he struggled to mask his concern. The whole trip back to the palace, he'd said little, scared to ask any questions about what had just happened. Forgive me, Mr. Gresset, she smiled sadly. I woke up realizing I had another batch of eggs to lay, and I was dealing with that matter all morning. It was 5 eggs this morning, so I believe my next round will be around the same number. Is it so easy to anticipate? Jake asked, hardly caring. Not always, but an educated guess. The Queen could see the look on Jake's face and frowned. The event in the town square, the Cyclops attack, it bothers you? She asked. Jake nodded his head. He didn't need to ask how she knew about that. He'd learned that Apisara communicated through pheromones and antenna fidgeting and vibrations. No doubt the word had reached her about the attack. I'd never seen anything like that, Jake admitted. I don't quite understand what happened. The Queen sat up a bit and sighed. This happens from time to time, she explained. Our kingdom is situated close to the Keltarath, the Forest of Shadows. It's a very dangerous place, and on occasion the abominations in that forest will break into the city and run wild. That Cyclops was one such creature. But how did it break in? And why did all the Apisara just stand there and go rigid when it showed up? Why didn't they scream or run or anything? Jake asked. It was haunting. How they just all turned and stared at it. They were scared, but they were doing their duty first, the Queen explained. The Cyclops broke through one of my external walls to get into the city. The minute the wall broke, it alerted the soldiers. They sent out a pheromone warning to the city that informed the entire populace of the intruder. All of my children received the signal and began searching for the Cyclops, and then when finding it, began releasing the same signal pheromone to inform the soldiers of where it was. Their duty to the city comes before their fear and self-preservation instincts. Jake shook his head in disbelief. That's so hard to believe.
Some of them just stood their ground as it clobbered them. They don't care about living? Why do they all just act like robots? Jake cried.
I'm not familiar with that word, robot, the Queen explained. However, I assure you they do care about living, but you must understand, Jake, that we are a very different species. One Apisara alone is not that strong. We require unity and one another to live and to survive. If one Apisara puts themselves over the needs of the colony, then they go against their very nature, the very attribute that allows us to endure. I'm sure my children were terrified of the monster, but they also knew that to run away and hide, not assisting the soldiers, would have been detrimental to the hive.
Jake tried to understand this, but still found himself struggling. All right. Then what'll happen to the bodies? He asked quietly.
We are a tight-knit community, the Queen explained. Disease is perhaps our greatest enemy of all. We dispose of corpses very carefully. The workers' caste will carry the monster's body outside and into the forest for the scavengers, and we will bury the fallen soldiers and the citizens.
You bury your dead? Jake asked.
Do you not? The Queen asked.
Well, we do, but I wasn't sure if that was a shared custom, Jake admitted.
We bury them outside the city in potential farming lands where their bodies will decompose naturally and become fertilizer for us to continue growing crops. Even in death, their bodies continue to benefit everyone.
Jake nodded and sighed. I'm sorry if I came off rude, Jake explained.
Not at all, dear, the Queen replied. I do not expect you to understand our ways or culture. It is alien to you, as your ways are to us. It would please me immensely to see your own world, but alas, I cannot go and see it myself. Malfera needs me here.
She stroked one of her long fingers along the arm of her throne and sighed.
The things I'd love to see.
I could tell you if you wish.
A wonderful idea, but I fear we would not have the time for all the questions I'd like to ask, she explained. But for the time being, it would please me for you to remain for another night. Let me make amends for the events of today and let you tour my queendom tomorrow. I will show you far more than what you saw today, and you can see our whole community working.
Jake smiled at the thought. And you'll show me personally?
Of course.
What if you have to lay eggs again? Jake smirked.
I doubt to lay again tomorrow, but if I do, then I shall permit you to stay with me until I'm done. It's unbecoming of a queen to invite a guest and then leave them alone for so long.
Wait, Jake cried, standing up fast. I couldn't actually stay in the room with you while you're laying your eggs, he cried.
Why ever not?
It's rude. It's inappropriate, Jake cried.
To humans, perhaps, but for me, it's just another part of my job. The nursery caste is in the room with me to take the eggs away once laid, and I simply remain on my throne until the process is done, she answered.
I mean, does it hurt? Is it uncomfortable?
It's not necessarily pleasant, but it's hardly painful, the Queen answered. It's just another part of my job as Queen, to bring the next generation in of my people. She finally stopped smiling as she approached Jake, reaching out a hand. But this conversation must save for later. I'm quite famished, and I would be delighted to dine with you this evening.
Jake sighed and took her hand. I'm wondering if I'll ever get used to this society. It truly is so starkly different from any that I've ever seen.
That depends highly on how long you remain with us, Ambassador, and I do hope that it is for some time yet. There's much I want to know, and much you have yet to see, she explained. But if you are to remain with us for some time, I have a request.
Well, what is your request, Your Highness? Jake asked.
I would like you to refer to me as Melody, and I might refer to you as Jake. I would wish us friends, not merely professional courtesies.
She beamed, showing a glowing smile.
I've never had a friend beyond my own children, and they're hardly great conversationalists.
Jake smiled back despite himself. He still didn't know if he liked everything about the Apisara or their government and culture. But that smile from the Queen was welcoming and inviting in a manner he'd not felt in any other country he'd visited for work. I think we can arrange that, Melody, he said assuredly.
Then I am pleased to befriend you, Jake, she chuckled heartily. Now, let us eat well. I have some things I'd like to ask you.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of part 2. All right, well, that is that. And chat seems lost in its own conversation, so I think that's a good way to wrap it up. let's back out of this. All right. Well, that was fun. I'm going to drink real quick. There isn't a part 3, Cuban. I only wrote 2 parts to the story. I had a lot of fun with this tonight. I thought it was very fun, and we had about, I think, 35 viewers at one point, which is really cool. I didn't expect this series to be so popular, but getting to sit down and just read with you guys, although it's not really a chill stream, is it? I mean, it's definitely a reading stream, but is it a chill stream? Sometimes I get very passionate in my reading, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll just read something simple, like maybe a biblical passage, or maybe a few poems, or maybe I'll just read something for fun. Heck, maybe I'll do a reading like Harry Potter stream or something. Like, I don't know. There's a lot I want to do with this, but I have a question for you guys, and I do want you guys, don't just answer in chat, okay? I have a challenge for you guys. Please answer this in the comments too, because I want y'all to give me a comment on this. Answer this in the comments so that I can look back on this later. I'm thinking, should I do this series that I'm doing here, this chill and read stream, should I do this on my other channel? Because this is about reading my stories, and I have a whole separate channel dedicated to my reading and writing. Do y'all think that I should do this on my other channel? Now let me know in the comments down below. That would be what I asked. But anyway, with all that out of the way, we're coming up on 11 o'clock here. I'm not super tired, but I do feel like I've done as much reading as I can for tonight. So I think that will be all we do for tonight. I want to start by thanking all of you so much for watching. This is such a fun series. I'm glad that I get to do it with you guys. For those of you who are watching this later, thank you for watching and for taking the time to listen to me read my stories. I have so many stories, guys. So many stories. I'm thinking that maybe when I finish reading New Epoch, I may read you guys Monster Club. Oh, that'd be fun. I'd love to read Monster Club to you guys. But anyway, thank you so much. That's about all I really have to say. I hope you guys had a good time like I did. Anyway, thank you guys so much. And I will see you in my next video. Take care.